don't even know what that means. AI this and AI that. I'm not a Luddite, y'all, but all this technology. Mija, I'm gonna make you co-host so you can admit people, okay, Mija? And I'm gonna welcome you and welcome Al and welcome Pedro. All right. We're just gonna wait for that one student to come back down because he's getting the lost sheep. Just kidding. It's also raining and I got a bad headache, bro. Sorry. All right, you not co-host. You laggy, girl. What is that? Jump to the latest. All right, can you see my students all right? Say hi to
Yeah.
Pedro. He's from
Hi.
Los Angeles. Mijo, do you want to move over this way? You don't have to be if you're shy or, God forbid you have a stalker. You don't have to be on that side, and Al's gonna hop over that way. Y'all not hungry today? You don't want some water or some chips or something? No? Okay, thank you, Xander. No, you awake? Más o menos? There's also a virus going around, and the students are dropping like flies. And my policy is that if you're sick, stay home. I don't want your germs. The responsible thing to do during these times. You like my dress? My kids picked it out for me for my birthday. Oh, you can't see my dress. Hold up.
Oh yeah, that's
Maybe
looking
I'll
good.
give this a I talk too much anyway. All right, see? Oh, a deer's coming. Yay, a deer. Welcome. All right, we're on Harold Washington time, a deer. The students forgot we were supposed to be down here, and so one of my students went up to bring them down. So who wants to go first? Do you want to go first, Al, or do you want to go first, Pedro?
It's up to you. Doesn't matter.
Well, you're listed first alphabetically, so we'll start with you. So how's everybody doing? It's all ugly out today. It's all gloomy black. But my spirits are good. You doing well? You can chat it out. And so how we're gonna do this is after I do the introduction. Oh, okay, we can get started. Gracias, mijo. ¿No había nadie? Tingo lilingo. I bet you I'm gonna see them when we go watch the movie. You watch. Then they're gonna show up. I'm recording it. It's all good. All right. So welcome everybody. Hello, come on in, come in. Welcome, welcome. I'm not my usual uppity self, not uppity, high energy self, believe it or not, because the rain's giving me a bad headache. TMI, TMI. But I'm gonna not talk as much as I usually do. Yeah, we'll see. Ah, just kidding. So my name is Dr. Jesús Estrada. This is my English 102 class and friends, and welcome Atir, who is joining us. So we're going. Oh, what's up? What?
Hello.
Yeah, bring him. Okay, we're gonna wait a little more. We'll wait for y'all. Hey, did you all grab a ticket for a book raffle? Okay, so you who are virtual can also win a couple of Kindle books. I'm gonna raffle the Broken Branches that Pedro has written a piece in. That's a charity piece for Palestine. And then Al's really amazing book. And so I'm gonna keep the introductory remarks short. So are they coming down right now, sister? Hermana, are they coming right now? All right, brilliant. And so Pedro Iñiguez is primarily a horror writer, but he's pretty prolific. He currently lives on Los Angeles. He's also a phenomenal cook. So I love watching his food porn on social media because it inspires me to be a better cook. But
Thank you.
he's an animal lover like myself, and he's an amazing writer. He's published a couple of stories in anthologies that I've put out. Just beautiful, beautiful magical realism writer, you name it. And Al Julius is actually a teacher by trade, so much love for that. And he wrote this phenomenal book that he's going to talk about, and it's an essay on horror, and it's really insightful and really cheap if you want to get a copy. He will be signing books here in person. You're not obligated to purchase them, and he'll gladly sign the copies that I'm going to raffle. And so let me spotlight you, Pedro. But they're going to talk for about a read for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to open up to question and answers. And one of the things I wanted them to talk about, because I'm really fascinated by this, because Pedro writes full time, It's what it's like to be a Chicano in the industry, right? And any other things you want, if you want to talk about why he chose to, be in the charity, or you want to talk about how Al balances his busy family life with writing life, which is not easy. It's not easy. So, Pedro, if you want to say a little more about yourself and then read for about 5 minutes, and then Al will be on stack. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Pedro Iñiguez. I am a science fiction and horror writer from Los Angeles. I started writing in 2009. That's when I had my first story published, and I've had over 100 publishing credits, short stories, poems, a novel, a fiction collection, and I have two other projects that I can't quite announce yet, but they're pretty big and they're coming up. One later this year and one maybe next year. And I have a comic book, my first comic book coming out. David Bowles, who is a really famous Chicano author, he has a company called Chispa Comics, and they have some issues written by some Stoker winners. And he invited me to write an issue, and that's going to be coming out maybe at the end of the year. So that's something else I'm working on. I've been in books with a lot of people like Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, so a lot of notable authors, Cinti Pelayo, Gabino Iglesias, both of them just won the Stoker last year. So I have a story here. It's really short. It's called Skins. This was published in Nightmare Magazine a few years ago. And this is a short horror story. I can probably knock it out in 5 minutes. So here you go. The morning was cold and overcast, and the few slivers of sunlight that caught on Marlon's body did nothing to warm him in the slightest. He cursed under his balaclava and tried to listen for the sounds of helicopters and schooners over the groan of ice scraping alongside the boat. They had been far out at sea, farther even than most fishing vessels had typically ventured this time of the season. He doubted anyone had followed them to this empty stretch of coastline. There was nothing out here but pain and emptiness. Uncle Harold jumped onto the ice first, wasting no time. When Marlin was certain everything was clear, he cocked his rifle and vaulted over the side of the boat after him. As he landed, the ice beneath his boots cracked. Fuck, he whispered. He took a gentle step forward, using the rifle to steady himself like a tightrope walker. The ice shelf had appeared solid from out at sea, but now he wasn't so sure it would hold long beneath his girthy frame. Hey, Biggie, Uncle Harold said, turning back at him. Get your fat butt over here, kid. I count 5 seals. If we can corral them into a tight kill zone, it'll make our jobs easier. Marlin nodded and trudged ahead as a fierce gust blew in. The cold began to cut into his hands like 1,000 razors. Forgetting his gloves at the docks had been stupid, even for him. He wiggled his fingers to keep the blood pumping, hoping he could still pull off a decent shot when the time came. The last thing he wanted was to screw this up. Hell, he couldn't afford to at this point. He shrugged off the thought and tried to focus. If his uncle was to be believed, he was 5 well-placed shots away from paying off his bookies. Apparently, there was a healthy illicit market for sealskins, meat, and blubber outside the watchful jurisdiction of the Canadian government. Sketchy buyers whose identities were best left anonymous. Put it like this, his uncle had told him. If it exists, there's a market for it. Uncle Harold knew all about stuff like that. He got to know some big players during his stint in prison. Marlin spotted a pair of plump spotted seal cubs meandering across the ice. Siblings, perhaps. Their eyes glimmered like fresh snowpack in the distance as they belly flopped playfully over one another on the edge of the shelf. He felt a tug at his heart. He wasn't the kind to do this under ordinary circumstances, but he was in a predicament, a life and death sort of bind. A few bad hands at poker could doom a man in extremely horrific ways. Uncle Harold brandished what resembled a pickaxe and brought it close to his chest, only it was different. The club had a small blunt hammerhead on one end and a long curving hook on the other. What is that thing? Marlin said, raising his voice over the wind's roar. His uncle stroked his gray beard, keeping his eyes fixed on a solitary seal that had strayed from the pack. A haka-pick, he shouted back. After you shoot the things in the head, I'll come in close and smash their skulls with one end and hook their bodies onto the boat with the other. You can guess which side does what. Marlin felt his insides churn. He was glad he was only going to be doing the shooting. A single well-placed shot meant a quick death. Hell, he wouldn't even be doing the skinning. Still, he couldn't help but feel dirty inside. He tried to change the subject. What are you going to do with your share of the money, Uncle Harold? His uncle smiled. Well, Biggie, I wasn't going to tell you until later, but I was planning on giving you my cut. I figured you wouldn't have much left after you pay off your debts, and you'll need something to get you back on your feet. I mean, what's family for, am I right? Before Marlin could respond, a loud crack filled the air. Uncle Harold's head exploded in a burst of hair, flesh, and red chunks before his body toppled to the ground. Another explosion. Something struck Marlin's jaw. He fell beside his uncle's corpse where his blood had canvassed the ice like a bucket of spilled paint. Marlin's face flared with pain as he reached for his rifle. Then came another crack, and his right hand blew apart in a burst of bloody fragments. He howled while his wounds throbbed to the beat of his racing heart. Then came darkness. A few moments in and out of consciousness elapsed before he heard the sound of crunching beside him. "These two will do," said a gruff voice. "Lots of skin between the both of them. Probably family." Said another. "Plenty of nourishment and warmth to be had. The buyers will be pleased." Marlin managed to turn his head slightly. A hawk-a-pick came down on Uncle Harold's spine, the hook lodging itself deep into his tissue. Streaks of crimson trailed his body as it was dragged across the ice. In his peripheral, he spotted the twin seal pups slithering off the shelf and into the sea. He thought about crawling for the edge. It couldn't have been more than 10 meters away. Through the pain, Marlin inhaled a deep breath and with his remaining hand dug his fingers into a crack in the ice and tried to pull himself forward. As he crawled, his head scraped along the jagged floor, the impact dislodging a few teeth from the cavity in his face. The crunching of ice reared up in the distance again. He lay still, crying. Warm tears streamed down his face, burning as they entered his wounds. "That one's lost a hand," called out the gruff voice. "Yes. Should still fetch a fair price," the gruff voice added. Lots to work with, lots of skin." The cold began to numb Marlin's body as he lay beside a pool of expanding blood. Before he blacked out, he heard the crunching of ice stop behind him. It was then he was glad he wouldn't feel much before the end. At least, that's what he'd hoped. And the end.
All right. Damn. That was amazing. You know, one thing I love about your stories, Pedro, is that there's always a great twist at the end. That was unexpected and definitely a lot to unpack there. So thank you so much. So we're gonna have Al read next for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to open for question and answers. For those of you who came in late, we are recording. If you want to fix your camera or change your name, and how we're gonna go do this is that you can chat the question, or we can unmute you. You can speak. All right. And so I don't know. I'm gonna spotlight you, mijo. Um, I don't know where the best place is for you to stand, but yeah. Hey, perfect. All right. Beautiful. Oh, toma, mijo. Are you sure? Can you hear, but the Zoom people, can you hear him okay? Or does he need the mic? Yeah. Here you go.
First of all, I want to say thank you to Jesú, Dr. Estrada. Thank you for the invitation to speak. It's good to be here with you guys and also with Pedro, who I feel like is my online friend, but first time I'm meeting him
Good.
and
Nice
saying
to meet
hello.
you.
So
Hey,
yeah, he's an amazing writer.
thank you. Likewise.
So yeah. So I'm going to read from an essay. This is nonfiction. So this is a book called Endless Depths. It's my book of nonfiction pieces. I also write a little bit of fiction. Have been writing fiction for about a year or two, but mostly nonfiction essays. So I'm going to read a little piece that's probably the most personal of this whole book. So it's not in one sense, it's not really doesn't exemplify like a lot of the writing in here, but I just thought it might be good when I'm speaking with students of writing and students of books and literature, and that's what we're here for, to talk a little bit about like how I was inspired by books when I was young. Okay. Okay, so this is from an essay called Florilegium Stellarum, basically a phrase that I made up, but it is a real Latin, which basically means a notebook of the stars. Okay, and this is a section called Interstellar Architecture. The architecture of my inner experience has its foundation in the outer reaches. Our bodies and all matter we know of that exists are quite literally composed of stardust. The elements that comprise the organism were once embedded within the churning spheres of gas out there in the vast dark. Dying stars that have exploded in supernova throughout the past billions of years fashioned the particles that make up our brains, our hearts, our skin. Nebula stretching across light years once held the particles of our own creation. Looking up to the night sky, therefore, we look into the deep past of elemental creation. The capacity for thought has developed from an epoch of reproduction in the primordial soup to the contemplation of the cosmos in literature and art. To us, the duration of time seems incomprehensibly long, yet it is only a blink of astronomical time. At present, while some of us recognize only what we have come to know, some of us thirst for that which has been occulted. All in all, consciousness allows us to negotiate the physical world, to deliberate about our relationship to it. and to apprehend the numinous. Dr. Edgar Mitchell was an astronaut who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences for the study of consciousness. He knew full well the mystical yet very real transformation that one can undergo at the contact point of awareness and the unknown. He is a witness to the immensity of space, and within it is the relative smallness and insignificance of our home planet. His epiphany in space rekindled a kind of understanding and fueled his latter life drive towards studying the intimacies of the inner experience. What Mitchell experienced on his voyage between the moon and Earth is a documented phenomenon known as the overview effect, which represents a fundamental transformation in cognition or a way of thinking. Seeing isolated Earth against the backdrop of the infinite chasm of space has resulted in numerous other astronauts reporting the very same kind of epiphany. In his book, The Way of the Explorer, this astronaut theorizes about the ways in which the cosmos are, to echo the words of Henry David Thoreau, revelatory to the soul. What if human consciousness is the universe's way of knowing itself? Bibliophilic baptism. Long before I encountered these heady ideas in any organized way, I lay my head upon my pillow and projected my youthful imagination. This is where I suppose my journey outward into the cosmos began. During my youthful days, I spent considerable time concealed within the stacks of the small public library near my childhood home. The library was in actuality mere steps away, somewhat squat and unassuming between a few meager grocery stores and hardware stores. Hence, my baptism was by books. Clear are the memories I have of a midweek summer day when the library had just opened its doors, and I had the place all to myself. I became familiar with the kindly septuagenarian ladies who placidly carried out the library's daily operations. This sanctuary was unreachable to the bustle and commotion of the outside world. Slowly pacing up and down the aisles, I remember discovering topics and writers, stacking books up and sitting at the table in the corner to handle them and appreciate them. As I gazed about the towering shelves, at least to my eyes at that stature, I felt at home. Looking back, it was actually a womb-like comfort, but at the same time, the desire for all the knowledge that lay before me was intensely sparked. I recall my imagination becoming overloaded with the discovery of tomes that became close to my heart by writers such as Jules Verne and H.G. Wells and Arthur C. Clarke. This feeling has proven to be an insatiable desire that has never waned. Now, my hearth is my home library, an alchemical lab of letters. Ever since those early days alone in the library, my goal has been to resurrect the sublimity of being ensconced by physical books, sacred vessels of knowledge and feeling. As a hearth radiates warmth, so too does the roaring fire within each tome, so that collectively the conflagration burns bright. In his book, The Library at Night, Alberto Manguel offers many ways in which the collection of books manifests itself. He declares that the library is at once a myth, order, power, and a mirror of the mind. In his chapter, The Library as Workshop, he writes that for readers, the home library is like a den or a nest, holding the shape of their bodies and offering a container to their thoughts. As a book collector and student of the esoteric, a most vital aspect of my own pathwork has been the notebook. I proffer that this tool is absolutely essential to any student, any seeker on the path. A journal in which to write, and one to always keep close to you, may take on many forms and purposes, whether to record one's travels, dreams, reading impressions. It is a method to negotiate inner experience. Every thinker I have admired, whether current or in the past, has kept notebooks. Their modeling was the reason I first started keeping my own notebooks, and their use has become a rather natural extension of my own mind. That's the part. Thank you.
I figured out the perfect spot for us to sit. It's gonna be. I'm pretending I'm Oprah.
You get the mic then.
But I'm a little, I'm cuter. Just kidding. All right, right here, and I'm gonna pin both the speakers. So Lisette, Mija, if there's a question that's elevated, I'll be able to see it. Okay, this is brilliant. Sorry, the camera angles are a little bit wonky. So the best compliment you can give these brothers, because they've taken time out of their busy day to come share their beautiful work. No, add it. Hold up. I can do this. I teach for a living. Okay, wait, add spotlight, not replace spotlight. Hey, there we go. So now we're both spotlighted. So the most beautiful compliment you can pay Al and Pedro are not the gifts I'm going to give you. Have a seat. Are the questions you ask. And so You can ask, I mean, they're also politically rich in knowledge. You can ask about current situations. So these are my English 102 students, but I also have creative writing students. If you want to talk about, the writing. By the way, that was a beautiful essay. You and I are nerd kin, for reals. But books are so important, and they're important to a lot of students. And one of the things that I loved from the get-go, and it was all my students, hi, how's it going? Was that they were all carrying books. And I was like, did I die and go to heaven? Like, what's up? So if anybody has a question in the chat or audience, if you don't feel comfortable being on camera, just be behind mijo. And then you won't be on camera, but they'll hear your voice. Does anybody want to ask a question about horror writing or what it means to be Chicano in the industry, or maybe, any other thing that you want to ask about? Zoom people, you two, you can unmute. Oh, come on. All right, I'll go there. So you mentioned Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. Al, and this question is also for you, Pedro. But who are other Chicano inspirations or Latinx or people of color that have inspired you as a writer? We'll start with Al and then hit it for you, Pedro. I shouldn't say hit.
Right. So the person that comes to mind for me is Victor Villaseñor, because what is so impressive about him is he's able to tell a generations long story. I mean, his stories some of them span hundreds of years of families, and I don't know how he keeps it all together. I hope one day that I can do something like that. I don't know. Most of what I write now is essays. I'm writing some fiction. My fiction are all short stories. So I think about a story and I can tell it in 5,000 words. But to write about so many characters, it's just an impressive thing to be able to do. And just not only that, but also just telling stories of people, especially from Mexicans who didn't really there weren't many voices, and these stories weren't being told. I think that's impressive to interweave that. But just like the cathedral that he built for these families, that's why I see his books. They're like just giant cathedrals that are just like for these people. And that's one person who was very inspirational to me. Although I don't really necessarily write like him now, but I want to someday.
Yeah, I'm working on a novel myself, not to talk about me, and I have a hard time just negotiating the characters within, and I'm not a plotter, so it's you're right. There are these giants of literature that not only have very complex characters, but each character has a desire, and that's not easy to do. Pedro, what about you?
So that's actually a good question because it ties into a lot of what I do. And so growing up and even today, there weren't really many Mexican American or Chicano writers of influence that it affected me because basically growing up, every writer that I read was white. And for the most part, that's still the way the industry is. So I grew up on like Ray Bradbury, Stephen King, Dennis Etchison, Clive Barker, Robert Heinlein, and those were my influences because that's all I knew. That was literally when you think literature, you think just the white people, especially when you were growing up, especially in school way back when I was going. And it's only now that you're really starting to see a lot of people of color get published. It was happening before, but really not on this scale. And even now, it's still very the numbers aren't even close. So it's only now that I've been starting to read people of color. And when I started writing back in 2009, even earlier than that, I thought, are Chicanos not writing? Are we not into fiction? Are we not into this? And that wasn't the case. It's just that there were certain gatekeepers, and we didn't have the resources or knowledge of how to get published in this industry. It also depends who's putting these books together that have a certain leaning towards who they want to publish. So now I'm starting to there's been a few books I've been in. There's one called El Porvenir Ya from Somos en Escrito Press. It's a all Chicano science fiction book. I think it's like the first of its kind where it's just all Chicano science fiction stories. And then before that, I was in a book called Speculative Fiction for Dreamers. That was put out by Ohio State Press. And that one has a lot of Latino writers, and a lot of them are Chicano, and that's like a lot of science fiction and fantasy stories. So you're starting to see that now, but growing up, I really didn't have any Latino influences besides like maybe something that was mandated by school, like House on Mango Street. But in terms of genre fiction, you really wouldn't see too much of it. I know there's authors like Ernest Hogan, who's considered like the father or the grandfather of Chicano science fiction, a genre like to call Chicano futurism. But besides that, there aren't really too many people, and you're starting to see it now. You're starting to see some Latino names, not just Chicano, but Latino names like Gabino Iglesias and Cintia Pelayo and V. Castro. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that wasn't really the case. So something I do now is I put a lot of Latino characters or Chicano characters or Mexican characters into my writing, into my stories, because it's something I didn't grow up with. And so it's something that I'm consciously trying to do now. So yeah, that's my answer. I didn't really have a lot of influences growing up and trying to be the change that I want to see, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, I feel you, brother. In fact, all those writers you mentioned were the ones I grew up with. And I'm old, I'm maybe 20 years older than you. But and I say that Stephen King saved my life because I was so bored growing up in the desert. There was no cable, but I still appreciated themes of racism in there. And for me, it was probably music that had a deep impact because you had Latino artists like Los Bukis and other political songwriters, but it's true. And it wasn't until I would think maybe I was getting my doctorate that I started reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Isabel Allende. But I just want to mention that, Cintia Pelayo and Gabino Iglesias are coming next month, but they are the first Puerto Rican born writers to have won the Bram Stoker. Sina for Crime Scene, a poetry collection of horror, and Gabino for a novel, and that's tremendous. Gabino also won, what's the name of that prestigious editing award? I can't think of it now. You know what I'm talking about? He won this major editing award. But part of the problem, and I'm sorry, I'll shut up after this. I do talk a lot. Part of the problem is, in the past, who was translated was also a racist issue. So who got translated wasn't necessarily people of color, right? So we didn't see these great works like we're seeing now. But now, with the introduction of all these technologies, like, for example, Al has an independent press, I own an independent charity press, and I purposefully publish underrepresented writers, queer writers, working class writers. The first writer I published was a Zapotec former gang member who first generation, you know what I mean? And the work is beautiful. But if I hadn't published his collection, I bet you City Lights wouldn't have taken it. Not to say City Lights sucks, but they have a particular audience they're moving towards. And so even now we still deal with these systems of racism and oppression. But Al, if you want to, you already answered the question, right? Yeah, right. Anybody else have a question? I see a lot of you going like this, so I'm waiting to hear some groovy questions or people in the Zoom audience. Oh, okay. So the question is, okay, so Anika says the publishing industry seems so impossibly distant and foreign. How did you first get published? Who wants to start?
I can go. That's fine. Yeah, so there's a few resources online that you can check. There's also a few in print. There's like magazines like Writer's Digest that have like on the back usually like listings of publishers that and what they accept, what kind of genre work they accept, and do they accept email submissions or do you have to mail them submissions? And do they require an agent from you, or can they be unagented submissions? There's also web resources. If anyone wants to write this down, there's something called the Submission Grinder, which is probably my favorite tool online. It's a website that lists hundreds and hundreds of publishers, and there's like a lot of criteria you can filter whether they're paying markets or non-paying markets, word count, what genre they're looking for, all kinds of things like that, poetry too. Though my advice is always try to go for a paying market. A lot of people, especially when they're young or early in their writing career, they're desperate to get published. They just want to see their name in a book. And there's a lot of predatory publishers out there who won't pay you, and they just, they'll put your work in there for free. So try not to do that if you can. I understand the pull towards wanting to get published, but if you can, try to get paid, even if it's like a free copy of a contributor copy of your book, even if it's just 1 cent a word, a flat rate of $10, something. Just try to get something, because then when you try to submit to another place, you look more like a more serious writer if you say, hey, I've been paid for my work, and that's going to snowball and continue. So they're going to take you a lot more seriously too, as opposed to just, oh, this is just another amateur writer. But there are some resources online. If you're a horror writer, there's something called the horrortree.com. It has like a lot of markets for horror writing, but my favorite is the Submission Grinder. So look that up. They have all kinds of markets. So when I was young, I did that, or there was a lot of Facebook groups that list markets, and so you try to just write something that would fit what the publisher's looking for. You send it off to them and hope for the best. Sometimes it can take weeks, months to hear back. Sometimes the longest I've ever had something come back to me was 3 years, and that wasn't cool. But it happens. It happens sometimes. But yeah, there's a lot of resources you can look out for. And so once you familiarize yourself with different publishers and what they're looking for, you kind of know who to send things off to, and that should help you a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of good information that Pedro said. One thing I would recommend to anybody in this room, there are a lot of book signings in our city. Chicago has a lot of libraries, bookshops where authors are speaking this week and next week and the week after. So what I would do, I suggest kind of, looking them up, follow them on Instagram, so that you can look at their schedules. And when I first started, when I was probably, when I was in college, I used to use a Chicago Reader. I think they might list signings and book talks. But if you're interested in like books and writing in the industry, or just meeting authors, that's a great way to do it. And I think that any writer and author, in my experience, wants to talk to the readers, wants to talk to potential readers, or wants to talk about books. That's my experience. So I think that one thing that I would do is just look for those and go out and meet them. And to answer the question more specifically, how did I first get published? Well, what I did is I was reading magazines I was interested in. I was interested in folklore, so I was reading folklore magazines. I was interested in horror short stories, so I was reading those. I was interested in comic books and magazines about comic books. So I was reading these for years, and I was collecting these magazines and these journals, and there were some themed issues after, and I said, well, I think that I have an idea for this. I could have written something like this. And then it happened again. Or there's a element of folklore that I'm interested in and it's not represented here. I could have written that. I could have done that. And I was saying that to myself over and over. And I said, well, why don't I just try it then? I could try it. And I literally just found it. I looked at the information in the book and I emailed them. And I said, I'm interested in your magazine. I read it every month or whenever it comes, if it comes out twice a year, whatever it is. What can I do to be in your magazine? Because I have some ideas. And it's amazing because the ones that you might be surprised, just reaching out and saying, I'm interested. They did get back to me and say, well, if you're interested, send us a pitch, send us your idea, and then maybe send us like a writing sample. And not every single one got back to me, and I understand that. That's fine. And a lot of them are, a lot of the presses or magazines are being run by just a very, very small group. So we think, you might think that a publishing company, when you say that, and I know that Jesú, you said I have my own publishing company. Well, it's just me, So a lot of them are just a few people, but very passionate people and really care about what they're doing and want to represent that idea, that theme, or whatever it is, So I think just reaching out to them means a lot also. And I started doing that. But again, Submission Grinder is great. I do think that for me, you following these magazines on social media and just being aware of like when they might ask for submissions, and go ahead and try it. Go ahead and do it. I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher of seniors in high school, and there are some students who are now at CCC here and other schools in the last couple of years, and they got interested in writing because I talked to them about it and I saw that, and they came to me and asked me about them. So there are 2 or 3 students who are now submitting work. So it's not something it might seem foreign at first, and absolutely understandable, but at the same time, you absolutely can do it. I think it's very accessible now, and all it takes is kind of just reaching out. And I think that what I tell people is it's very similar to like music and what happened in music about 25 years ago, is that anybody can make an album in their own like room or living room. Because before you had to have a studio, right? And you had to know people, and you had to pay for it, and you had to write songs and pay like whatever it is, $500 for an hour or whatever it is. But now when when programs and music programs started coming out, like probably the 1990s, early 2000s, I think they were even like well known. I forgot who it was. There was like maybe like Madonna or something, or so yeah, some of them started creating their own albums in their house. So when that, and then so bands started doing that and using their basically their laptop. So like, so musicians were able to record music at home. I think that's, you know, the publishing industry, and like Pedro said, sometimes it moves slow. Sometimes it's sometimes a little bit farther behind. But now what's happening? I think a lot of the indie press is it's almost like you can do it at home and from home, and that's like the mentality. So I think that I just want to stress that if you're interested in being a writer, or just even like um, reading these magazines, or even like zines, that I'm a zine. I can talk about zines for a long time. But I think it's very accessible if you just kind of reach out and again, last thing, meet people and meet other authors when they have signings here.
So I can also speak to that. And even if you know, I own an independent press, but it costs money. It costs money for the graphic designer. I have an editorial board that's volunteer. I just I got somebody to volunteer doing the part that I like the least, which is copy editing, right? And I have a marketing director, and so it's got the pieces of a professional press, but it's not Random House. It's not going to get the reach that a big publishing house will. So you got to hustle. Either way, you got to hustle. The thing I was going to tell you is how I started publishing was through a writing contest. I was a big nerd back then, and I won both the fiction and poetry contest in the University Magazine in Washington State. But we also have the Garland Court Review here at Herald Washington, and the submission deadline is passed. But that's a really great way of submitting your art, your poetry, nonfiction, your fiction. At one point we created our own magazine when I was an undergrad. So there are ways, but one of the coolest publishing stories is that Adrian J. Walker is a hero of mine. He writes beautiful dystopian literature. And during the pandemic, he put a call for submissions, and I submitted a dystopian piece that I really enjoyed writing. And it's about fascism and alien invasion and what it means to be an independent person, stuff like that. And he accepted it, and it's in this You're Alone anthology. And the beautiful thing is that the proceeds from that went to help people during COVID, because as you know, people were suffering because they were unemployed and needed to pay the rent and whatnot. So yeah, follow your writers. Like I don't know how this happened, but Cynthia Pelayo and I are sisters, like legit, people of color, giving each other support, and I don't impose on writers either. Like I'm not like, hey, will you read my novel? No. I'm there to support her as a mujer, as a Latina, and she supports me as a non-binary person of color in this institution and in my activism and whatnot. But so it is possible to find a community of support like Pedro. I consider Pedro my brother because he's up at like 2 and 1 in the morning when I'm up, and I'm like, hey, what's up, bro? What are you cooking this morning? How's your dog or whatever? And just being real collegial and really supporting one another, because there's not many of us in the industry. There aren't. The fact that there are 2 Bram Stoker winners that are Puerto Rican born is a miracle, right? But others are coming up, and not to say that we shouldn't appreciate white authors. Another favorite of mine, she passed away. She was a Chicago science fiction writer. Was the woman who wrote Parable, Octavia Butler, who was an amazing activist. I love her. I wish I'd have met her. I never met her, but she's had a deep influence on me as a writer and as a person of color. You know what I mean? So you got to find your writing tribe. You got to find your writing support, because no book comes out of the blue. Like I have beta readers to read my work. I have, professional editor, you know what I mean? And so, you just gotta find, and then people to share your work with that you feel comfortable, to not be afraid. You gotta put yourself out there, you gotta take risks. And I never pass, and you all know I have a big mouth. I never pass up an opportunity to speak or read my work, ever. You know what I'm saying? And so the same thing with submissions. Sometimes I go through dry spells, but most of the stuff I submit is published because I work really hard at it and I explore who the publisher is and whatnot. And I do both independent and traditional, both. Yo no le digo no nada. I'm like, put it out there, man. You know. Um. So yeah. Anybody else have another question? This is excellent. Another question.
I guess when I heard your introduction, I noticed how you said you're doing fiction you started 2 years ago with fiction. How hard is that transition, starting from a different style of writing, transitioning to something completely not brand new to you, but something that's like, brand new to you, and like a much bigger scale in terms of like presenting it and like, sharing your ideas and whatnot. So like how tough was that barrier to come across?
No, right. That's an amazing question because I hadn't thought of it myself. So my my response is going to be like just searching for and talking off the top of my head and thinking, well, what is that? It's very and now. So yes, it's right. So I published a few things here and there, like probably 10, 15 years ago, but I didn't really start doing it seriously or saying, when I said when I was reading these magazines and I said I can do this, probably around 2019, summer of 2019. So I said I want to do this and I want to submit, I want to publish, I want to be a voice, and I want to have the stories and the passions and interests. I need to share this with the world, you know. So my first two fiction, I only have about, I think my fifth fictional piece will be coming out later this year. Okay, compared to about 20 essays over the past couple of years. So the first two fictional pieces that I wrote feel like nonfiction. So it's an interesting question because the way I wrote them was called analog. I don't know if anybody knows that term, analog horror, but analog. Do you know what's the movie? One of the famous movies of analog horror. It feels real, like a documentary, but it's not. Exactly. The Blair Witch Project. There's a few others, right? So it feels like a documentary. So my fiction feel like essays. The first couple, and I started doing it that way. So I was inspired by a couple of historical events that I thought were interesting and strange. And what I put in my book is that all these essays are about the wonderful and strange parts of our world, about our universe. And I had some ideas about how I can write a fictional short story, but make it real and mix in real people, real history, with a twist of something unusual or strange that happens that really, and maybe even like slightly terrifying, that I would just kind of put in there, because I think that, and this is another topic going into the idea of horror, or why horror. I think it's I don't know if I want to go there because it's a lot. There's a lot to it, but I'm still asking that question myself. I think that for me, when I read horror, it's like the most like sort of visceral reaction that I have. It's like almost like a cognitive reaction, but also like a physical reaction. And I think that exactly right. It's amazing like to have that. I think that, and it's interesting for me because people ask me about horror movies all the time. I'm actually not really that into horror movies myself. I'm really into horror comics and horror literature because I think that for me, horror comics is a different kind of cognition. I keep using that term, but basically it's like it's visual and it's mental, and it's like, because it's horror, it's like physical. So I love great horror comics, and one of my favorite horror comics is Swamp Thing, Alan Moore Swamp Thing, and I wrote a couple essays for a Swamp Thing magazine. So that's a really good question. So thank you. Yeah, but again, the first couple of fictional stories I wrote feel like an essay, but and people have said that. A few people reached out to me and said, I didn't know this happened. I said, well, it didn't. It's actually fiction. Yeah.
Compliment. Pedro, what about you? Have you had a shift in how you process or how you write when you've gone from one genre to the other?
Yeah, it's very different. It's hard to describe the process for it though, because it's just something that kind of comes subconsciously out of you once you've been doing it for so long. So it's hard to describe. But I guess with horror, like Al said, it's a little more visceral, more descriptive in I don't know, the moments of tension. When you're describing the scene, it's like, Joe turned the doorknob. He was shivering before he did. He heard something slithering on the other side. You really get descriptive in the moment of tension, whereas science fiction, you're a little more free to explore like concepts, the bigger picture, sometimes. Not to say that they don't focus on any moments of tension. They do, but it's a little bit different. I think with horror, it's more about the timing. When you rack it up, the tension, sentences get quicker and shorter. It's a tool that you really utilize to make it effective. Whereas science fiction, you're not necessarily focused on that per se. So there are little differences, and it's something that's really hard to describe, but they are there. I don't write nonfiction like Al, but there are different processes to writing. Like I write poetry, speculative poetry, like science fiction poetry. I write science fiction. I write horror. I've dabbled a little bit in fantasy and a little crime fiction. So there are different tools you utilize to write and emphasize each with their strong points. So like I said, it's hard to describe. It's something I've been doing for a while, but there are differences, and you'll notice it once you start writing them on your own. And so yeah, it's an interesting thing because it sharpens you as a writer when you jump from genre to genre, and it's something that just really benefits you. You know, try not to stick to one genre. Try not to read just one genre if you can. It's gonna make you a better writer also. So read widely, write widely, and you know, try different points of views. Try different you know, writing styles. You know, some are a little bit more poetic with the writing styles, like Ray Bradbury, that they call purple prose. You know, and then there's some that are very taut and tight, like a lot of mystery writers or noir writers. So try to experiment, and when you do, you'll have a better understanding of your own voice, your own personal voice as a writer.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and you know, and it
Yes.
won't come to you for a while if you're just starting out. You won't know what your true identity is as a writer, but as you start to write and really get into the rhythm of things after a few years, you really say, these are my strong points, these are my weaker points, I can do this really well, and I'm gonna work on this, and I know my own voice, and I can tell these kind of stories really well. And so it's really interesting to it's really fun actually to experiment with different writing styles and techniques, and kind of after a while you get into the rhythm of things. You say, this is me, this is my voice, you know. So there's certain writers that you read and this is their thumbprint, this is their style, I know them, and that's because they've harnessed that over some time, and you can pinpoint someone. So that's something really interesting when you jump from style and genre. So but definitely experiment with all of that. Yeah.
I agree. And he said a number of things that I teach in my creative writing class and to you as well. And that's to read prolifically, read everything. You know, when I teach my creative writing class, I have them set a reading and writing schedule. And the reading schedule isn't just for textbooks, it's also for them to start, you know, because sometimes nothing irritates me more than writers who are like, oh, I don't have time to read. And I'm like, what? It's like saying you're a cook and you don't experiment in the kitchen. This is ridiculous thinking, you know? Um, and be positive that this whole idea of voices can be such an abstract concept. But I encourage students and all of you to write in your particular way. That's why I tell you I want you to write to your own excellence. And it does take time to figure out what that is. When I was first I was an undergrad and I decided that I was really an English major. I was taking a poetry class by Barbara Anderson, she won like the Pushcart Prize, which is a big deal. Um, and she kept trying to get me to read Chicano writers, and I was like, no. I was resisting, like I want to be unique. But you know what? It turns out that I love to write about working class issues in the barrio. I mean, my characters are from who I am, who I know. You know what I'm saying? So she was right, and so in doing that, like I finally came to what it was and how I wanted to write poetry and fiction, and I probably published more poetry than I have fiction, which is interesting. But I wanted to ask you both. I know I'm being selfish. I'm going to ask you both a question because I have put horror on a pedestal, and I eat, breathe, drink horror movies, horror games, horror, comics, horror novels, horror short stories, you name it. But horror is the one thing that maybe I made a big deal about it, and you talked briefly about it. But what to you, Pedro, and you, Al, what are the elements of excellent horror? And I'll start with Al since Pedro spoke last.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I think for me is one of the elements, and it comes back to like what I'm really interested in, the kind of horror that I'm interested in. I love what's called the weird tale. And then when I say weird, it's a capital W, right? Because it's a genre of horror that it's like there's something that's present, that's unknown. And I think that the fear of the unknown is something that I always think about, the fear of the unknown when I'm writing it. And I think not just the unknown in general, but I think that what really scares people is what's unknown. Just in general, it doesn't have to be like a fear of horror, but just like entering a new situation, meeting somebody new. And there's like always like kind of nervousness about it. Will you take it a step further? And the idea of the fear of the unknown is a phrase from this writer H.P. Lovecraft, and I took that phrase and I used it to design a course for the Newberry Library here in Chicago. It's called Fear of the Unknown, in which we look at Edgar Allan Poe all the way to Thomas Ligotti and the weird tale. So I think for me, to answer your question, is that what makes a great horror story is something that's kind of unknown. I think that, Pedro, your stories too are really good about not completely showing what is the thing to be feared, right? Don't show the monster too much, because that is just kind of, it's just like sensational, right? It's not fearful, but like you said, what Pedro said, show the tension, so that when you do face it, when it does come, the tension kind of like breaks. And I think that's something that you can take and place that in almost like everyday life. That's why I think that horror is so good, because it's, again, intellectual, but it's also physical, but it's something we all have experienced. I think it says something also really deep about the human condition, the human experience also. So that's it.
That's beautiful. Pedro?
It's hard to say because there's so many genres, subgenres of horror. Like you said, there's the weird tale, which I'm a big fan of, and cosmic horror, which is kind of related to it. But there's also body horror, like The Fly or The Thing, where big transmutations happen to the body, and it's kind of like shocking, and people get grossed out by that. People have different fears, so sometimes they're not universal. Some people are afraid of spiders, which is very much known, not unknown, so, but to some people it's, fear of gang violence or cartels and beheadings and stuff like that. Getting caught in a situation like that, you wouldn't want to be kidnapped by a cartel and know you're about to be beheaded. That's kind of scary to me. And then some people are scared of aliens. What if there's aliens out there? I wouldn't want to be abducted. So people have different fears. One thing you can do to kind of make it somewhat universal or resonant with someone who isn't necessarily afraid of that is make the characters interesting, relatable, maybe perhaps. If you're not scared of spiders, but your mom is, and she happens to be swarmed by them, well, make the reader care about the mom character, something like that. So someone who will be afraid of spiders, make the reader care about someone like that. So I think the characters are a great bridge between reader and the story. Maybe you're not afraid of something like that, but if you care about the character, you don't want anything bad to happen to them. So some horror doesn't focus on the character development as much as setting tone or mood, which weird horror does actually a lot. It's more about the tone and mood, ambiance, atmosphere, being in a scary, weird, dreamlike scene rather than necessarily building up an interesting character. They want to creep you out. So like I said, some genres of horror focus on different things, but it depends on you and what you like to read or write, or something that scares you, you might want to transfer on the page. I think writing horror is a great way to deal with your own fears in a safe way and kind of analyzing them. And sometimes you walk away with answers, and sometimes you walk away with more questions. But in terms of what makes a horror story compelling, it really comes down to everybody's own tastes. And but like I said, I guess a great way to bridge some of those things are making characters interesting, someone you care about. So I think that's something to think about.
Yeah, I tend to be very character focused. That's a beautiful answer, and I agree. There's so much, and now so many genres that cross over, like horror comedies, horror romance. And to me, it's fascinating. It fascinates me just to see how it's developing in literature and also in the entertainment industry and TV and for movies. But I actually had a question for you, Pedro,
Mm.
because you fascinate me, brother, because you have taken the plunge and you write full time, and I think that takes a lot of courage. That's a very mild way of putting it. Can you maybe walk us through how you came to that decision? Because look, whether you're a traditionally published writer or an independent writer, it's a hustle. Oops, sorry, that's my phone. It's the focus should be on. My bad, Spider-Man theme. But if you can answer that, please.
Sure. It's not easy, and it's not something that's easily sustainable if you're not like making a lot of money with the big publishers, which I'm not. Sometimes I'll make some good sales, and it pays good money, but not enough to really sustain me. So basically, I was working retail for a long time. I had a job just like everyone else, and through the 401k, I saved up a lot of money. And one day I quit. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I couldn't take it. I had a lot of anxiety and just wasn't doing it for me. And I had already published a lot by then, but sometimes I'd average like maybe 5-6 stories a year. But then I withdrew all my money from my 401k. I saved a little over $20,000 and just pulled everything. I said, what would happen if I just took this money, made it last as long as possible, and just started writing? And there was a real big shift. I mean, there were years this happened about 4 years ago, and that's when I really started writing full time, and I've been averaging about like 20 publications a year since then, as opposed to like 4 or 5, maybe 6 if I was really lucky. So, but it's not something that's sustainable. It's not easy unless you're getting big contract with the top 4, big 5 publishers like Macmillan or Random House, Penguin, and all that stuff. So unless you're getting big novel book deals or movie rights being sold and stuff like that. So it just, realistically, it's, if you save up enough money, you can do it for a few years, but and have strong support system from your family and stuff like that, or any relationship. So you do get more work done if you're focused on it and committed to it, and you treat it like a full-time job. Like I write here for hours, and like Jesú knows, I'm up here, like sometimes I go to sleep at 5 in the morning. I'm up writing, like I write usually from like 9 p.m. to like 5 in the morning. Before that, I'm answering emails or replying to emails or reading and doing research and jotting down notes or outlining. Then the real work starts like later at night. So it's something you have to take seriously. It's not just a hobby, or you can't think of it as one. If that's really what you want to do, if you want to treat it as a hobby, you can. You can just write it. Art is art. You should always create it. But if you want to do it to get published or to make some money off of it, or just, if you want to satisfy that itch, then you got to treat it like a job. But you can't totally just say, hey, I'm just going to take a few hours a day or an hour a day and treat it like a hobby, and maybe I'll get something published here. And you can totally do that, and that's so cool. And that's how I started. I was working, going to school for a bit, and then I would just write the occasional story, send it off, maybe it'd get published. But then I was like, you know what, I don't want to work. I have too much anxiety, as I'd rather be at home just writing. It's what I do. So that's how I treated it. I treated it like a job. And I've had a lot of success since then, like a lot more than I've had back then. Now I've got, like I said, I've got 2 book deals coming up that I can't discuss yet. One will be soon. I've got that comic book, which pays an outrageous amount, that's coming out later this year. And so I've had a lot of opportunities, make great connections, because I treated it the way I wanted to, like a full-time job, like something I really cared and respected. So like I said, it's not sustainable unless you're making big contracts. And so eventually I'm going to have to go back and get a job until everything runs out, which I can see it on the horizon. But it's been great. It's allowed me to accomplish a lot of things that I normally wouldn't have had if the time for. I don't have a family. I don't have kids right now. So I have that going for me. I'm not going to school, so I have that going for me. So I have a lot of free time. So that's really helped me. And I know that's not realistic. Not everyone has that free time. A lot of people here are students. They're going to school. They have part-time jobs, or they have other things to take care of, families. So I have that luxury, and I saved up for it. And so that's really what's helped me out too. But realistically, it's hard. It is hard because there's more expectations, and you have to produce more. So, but like I said, it's a job. It's something. It's a passion, and it's fun, but it is a job at the end of the day. So that's kind of what my writing full time has been the last 3-4 years.
Well, Pedro, I'll say congratulations on the book deals. I can't wait to hear more about them. I'm really excited to see what they're going to be. I know you said you can't say much, so when you are able to say much, I can't wait for that moment.
Thank you. Yeah,
I'm just interested to see what they are.
Yeah.
And I love comics. That's actually what I wanted to do when I grew up. I wanted to be a comic writer. And I might get there. It's fascinating for me to see people like you, people like Cynthia, who has her own comic line now. And so to me that's beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. And I gotta say that and not to put a burst in anybody's dreams. And I see your question there. The writers who make a lot of money from their art, any art, are not the rule. They're the exception. Almost every full-time writer I know has a full-time job, including Cynthia Pelayo, including Adrian Walker. Paul Tremblay is a private math school teacher in the East Coast, and he's the kind of person that writes an hour a day. He doesn't plan it. This is part of his journey, the excitement of finding that hour, and he produces a novel a year, maybe every 2 years. So everybody's journey is different. Don't get demoralized. You know what I mean? I just happen to be very blessed, and I love my job. I love teaching y'all. But then I also I make this, I don't sleep a lot either. I make the space to write regularly and publish regularly and produce books for other writers. But it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. And the pandemic kind of messed everything up, but So there is a question in the chat, and the question is, I love short stories and their ability to transport you so quickly. How do you capture the audience quickly, and how do you know when the story is done? So it's a two-part question. Pedro, you want to start? And then we'll come to, wait, or Al? Who wants to start that one?
Either or.
Okay.
Do you want me
I
to go?
guess he defers to you.
To me?
Oh, go ahead, Pedro. I'll learn from you and then I'll go.
So capturing the reader's attention, it's hard to just pinpoint. Obviously, you can start with some kind of gripping sentence that will just capture someone's attention right away. You know, like Susie was 3 when she first died. You know, she was 4 when she came back. Something like that. You know, that's like, ooh, what's that about? Is she a zombie now? Like, so it's some kind of like, it's a tool, you know, that to capture someone's attention, but not every story starts like that. Sometimes stories start leading someone into someone's daily life routine. It's not anything of consequence. So basically, if you're good enough, you'll make it interesting. It doesn't have to be something gripping like that right off the bat. But if your writing style is easy to read, to follow, I think readers will trust you and follow you until something interesting happens. So there's no right or wrong way to capture someone's attention. So, and what was the second question? Second part of that.
How do you know when the story is done?
You don't. You just have to trust your instincts and say, I'm going to stop here. You know, if you read it back to yourself and you say, well, this works. This is a coherent story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and end, or it does its job, you know, that you set out to do. Sometimes as writers, we're perfectionists and we want to keep editing or tinkering with the story. And if we don't know when to just tell ourselves to stop, we're just going to keep going. Kind of like with a painter, you know, sometimes you just, well, maybe I'll add a stroke here, or, you know, maybe I'll wipe that away. You just have to know when to stop, know when you're satisfied with the story, when it achieves what you set out to do, you know. So no story is perfect. No art is ever perfect. You know, there's no such thing. So you just have to tell yourself this is enough. You know, it achieves what it set out to do. You know, maybe some stories you write or you're happier with than others, but when you do it long enough, you just know. You know, it's kind of like when you're a cook and they say, well, or a chef or something like that. How do you know when your eggs are done? You just know. You just look at it and you can just tell after years of experience, you know. So it's something like that. And when you're starting out, you're gonna have more trouble with that because it's like, shoot, is this doing its job? I guess something I would suggest is finding someone you trust who is well read to read your story and have, you know, like a beta reader. I don't use them myself. I just write and send it off. But if you're not sure, I would find someone you trust who knows literature and ask for their opinion and ask if the story does its job. But those would be my 2 answers. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was beautiful.
Yeah, no, that's great. To answer the first part, I think it's a great question. The way you said it, I think AP. Okay, Annika, yeah, great question. How short stories, you love them, how their ability to transport you so quickly. I think that's what a good short story should do, because they're not like a novel, right? And they don't follow the same kind of like rhythm and beats as a novel, right? At a certain point in the novel, you might you might open up with a setting or a scene or something, and you know that something's going to happen about maybe a quarter of the way through that's going to change the situation or change the writer. But in a short story, you don't have that. You know, you want to, as Edgar Allan Poe, and he's one of my gods. Edgar Allan Poe said, you know, for him, he said he thought that the short story was like the superior form of art, because you sit down, you put somebody in a world for 1 hour, and that's it, and they have the experience. So I always think about that. But the way I like to start short stories um, is to show the audience a situation that maybe they've been in or had somebody they love been in. And one example I have is, and it was actually a very difficult scene to write, sort of for me, is that I started a short story recently about a high school student, a sophomore in high school, being bullied in the locker room. And it was very difficult because I really do have those students who experience that. And you know, another question I want to ask Pedro, later, as a side note, so I don't forget, how do you write about bad people and get in their minds? Because that's something that's not easy a lot of times, right? It's like he was in the story that I wrote, there's a group of other people who are who basically are predators for this one other student. And to read that, and if I get the emotion right, and I want people to experience that and to know what it might feel like to be in that situation, to be bullied, and to not have anybody who's going to come and rescue that person, the fear that person might have. And and I think that it really captures people's attention because it's something that exists in our real world, and it's not a pretty thing, you know. And another what's another oh, I'm writing a story right now where it opens up with a person who's at work. It's in the morning and they dread their job, and he's just there waiting for lunch. He's like, when am I going to get through this? And we all had experience, you know, whatever it is, just not having a good day. Maybe you're really tired. And we've all experienced that, right? We've all experienced it where maybe have to go to class or go to your work or whatever it is. And you're just like, how am I going to get through this day? Like, I feel so tired and, I might have a headache or whatever it is. And we all experience that. So I think if you start well with something like that, make it authentic. I think that's the key for me, to just give the audience an authentic experience that we can all relate to in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're gonna have to hang on to that question because I lost track of time again. No, so we're gonna raffle some books, and I was trying to figure out how am I gonna do this for you people that are virtual. I'm gonna have you choose a number between 1 to 10, and the 2 students are gonna get a Kindle book of Broken Branches, which we didn't even get to talk about, and Al's book. And so we're also gonna raffle, Lisette, Mija, we're gonna raffle off the real books. I have 1 copy of Broken Branches, and then we're gonna do 2 of Al's books for this round. Do you want to pull the winners? All right, so I don't know. Can we hold up? So let's do the real in person, not the real, but the in person one first, and then we'll do the virtual one. But you can go ahead and put your number between 1 and 10 in the chat, and then you will be gifted a Kindle book. And I'll have to send that to you later because I'm gonna be busy today. And then also after this, Al is going to be signing copies of his book. So you are not obligated to purchase, but if you have the coin, the book is relatively inexpensive, including the Kindle version was like $2 or something. I bought the virtual book and I also bought the hard copy. So, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to do this old school. Okay, you hold the mic. We can do this.
I'll go with old school.
And mira, all my students are gonna win. This set, you want it? I'll just get you a copy.
All right.
Let's see. The first poll.
Number is 520547.
All right, Andrew, come on.
Awesome.
You get to pick either. They're both beautiful books. Endless Steps or the it's actually called Broken Olive Branches. I know it's a hard choice.
Well, I'll watch you as you choose.
Good. Right, very good. And you know what else writers really appreciate are favorable reviews on Goodreads and anywhere else on the planet. It's true.
That's good. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, let's see. Is this? It's this little smeared here. 520549, I think it is. 549, last 3 digits.
549.
549, I think, isn't it?
Yes, 549.
Okay. That's what it was. This is hard to read.
I think we got a winner here.
Hey, sweet,
right.
awesome.
Great.
I'm excited.
More?
Okay.
You hardly ate nothing. I bought too many snacks.
I think that the last 3 numbers are the ones that are different. 546.
Oh, hey, Endless Steps. All right, now for the virtual people. And then we also have a gift. You will also be getting a gift too. Oh, let's see. Who's the winner? Hold up, I can do this. 3 and 8. Nobody else wants to try? Nobody? Come on. You don't want to? Okay, then I guess you 2 win. I'm going to put my email in the chat so you can email me so I can send you. What I need is a Kindle email. And if you're not familiar with, I can walk you through that process. I know it's alphabet Estrada, Jesús at ccc. The book, not today because I'm crazy busy, but probably tomorrow. Okay, the number was actually 7, but you're winners. And listen, let's give them a huge round of applause. You can unmute. Pedro, and you are getting your honorarium, but also thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Think of Harold Washington as your second home. I'm gonna give it to you again later. And then Pedro, I'll be mailing you one as soon as I get my app together. But let's give them a huge round of applause because I think they were amazing, amazing, amazing. And thank you. Oh wait, oh my gosh. But you're welcome. That we got a few minutes yet, or if you want to sign, does anybody want to buy some copies for him to sign? Or okay, he'll be back there. Let me put. Hey, what's your email? Here, go ahead and type it. I'm sorry. I do this for a living, and I'm like, I forgot to write part of my email on there. I apologize. Hold up. Don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead and do yours, and I'll do mine. Does that say Nerdo? Oh, okay, Neptunes. Okay.
So if anybody's interested in emailing, go ahead anytime. Want me to read something? I'll do that.
Oh, take him up on that offer. Me too. I did say you're welcome to come to my office. People just randomly come to my office. I don't even know these people, and I do read their work, because all right, and this is mine for you to get your free Kindle book. In fact, I could probably do it between sessions. Jesus. Just to elevate a couple of things, we do, Mr. de Jesus at CCC, we do have a candlelight vigil at 1 o'clock in room 318 for the people of Gaza, if you want to come. And then y'all know we're gonna have a movie outing. We're gonna meet at 4 o'clock at block 37. I'm not paying for your tickets, but I'm buying the popcorn and the truffle fries. Before that, we're gonna be at Barbara's bookstore at 3 o'clock in the Macy's basement. Y'all are welcome. We're going to be looking at this beautiful display on Gaza and talking about the Rastafari movement. So this could be great research opportunities for you. If you want to talk about, did Bob Marley achieve revolution, right? Or did he achieve the unity he wanted? Or any question that's debatable. And of course, Palestine and Israel is hugely debated and divisive. That's why I think it's important to support our Palestinian sisters and brothers and non-binary friends, especially those that are suffering right now. So I don't want to leave it on the downer. Listen, thank you so much. This has been an amazing event. You're welcome to stick around because we're going to do it again at 11 o'clock. Thank you, virtual audience. You've been amazing. Please email me if you get lost and you're like, oh man, I lost your email. I'm in room 629. Come see me. I love visitors. And I have tea and coffee and I have snacks, right? Just say yes. Yes. So come visit me, all right? All right, have an amazing time. We're going to stick around. And Al, go ahead and I don't see what you got, Pedro. This bag is heavy. Yeah, listen, girl. Ooh, there's a t-shirt in here. Ooh, what? Is this a lunchbox? Damn. I'm keeping your bag, Pedro. I'm sending this to you via mail, brother. This is probably the best gift. And then we'll talk about honorarium. Bye. Sure. Have a good weekend. Work on your papers. Much appreciation to all of you.
Thanks, everyone.
You too. You're amazing. ¿Qué pasó, mija? Ay, chetos. Pues, Anne me puede ayudar.
No, pero si no, espérate.
¿Sabes lo que voy a hacer?
No.
Voy a hacer uno de esos. Oh, te tienes que llevar la computadora. No te preocupes, voy a estar bien. Sí,
¿Segura?
sí.
No,
Voy
pues, les dije que iba a salir a lo mejor pronto de mi meeting. En cuanto salga, me puedo conectar.
No te preocupes, mija, yo puedo. Nomás voy a estar separada aquí. ¿Qué pasó, pues?
No,
Y gracias por el café porque me dio un chingo con el dolor de cabeza. Oh my gosh, I'm so. Ay, mi sobrina. Ay, tu sobrina.
So I'll be back in a few minutes.
For sure, go take a break, brother.
Okay, you got it. I'll be right back.
Muchas gracias, mija. I appreciate you. De todo corazón, toda la paz. Listen, que no. I got your back, sister. En serio, que no te abusen, ¿eh?
Oh, no.
It's gorgeous. I wish I had one time to read, but I know that my books read that. But I read the first essay. It was the most I've read in a long time. I thought the book instead. I think you would enjoy it. Oh yes, you can find out. Beautiful. He's not Korean by just by race, but I'm stereotyped by spirit. It's cool. Now that it's level, and I don't understand why. Like you have plenty of money, you know. Like you're not rich, but don't see. 20 back. So you really piss me off for you to have water, you know. Like come on now. Like he's supportive, he doesn't read either.
Oh. To the students, I had something.
Oh my God, I love stickers. Put some stickers on $8. $8. The stickers you would put those. Did you design this?
No, I had advice.
Yeah, that's how.
Here's a-
The 2 artists are great.
two extras from a-
I have a graphic designer from Bohemia or somewhere in the Eastern Europe.
That two artists, she identified as her as a trans witch.
Oh, te conoce.
This is my.
Hola, Mia, qué gusto. Yeah, you can be favorites and I know we're just not. Yeah, as a student come in, you give them a round of people, just looking around a lot of people. Ahora de. Los tickets que están dañados, pues a los y es como la.
Yeah. Yeah, David, this man.
Your name?
Yeah, David also, you get by. So that it's here.
Yeah. Yeah. Best no.
All of it. You should probably. But they will send people.
I brought my house.
I think my. Well, yeah, if it's an ebook, it's not. It's not. That's not cheap. Well, then you comment, well, there's all students, so. Yeah, I think there were people Zoom. And then there's an little bit. So they. Oh, no, they were there first. So it just. No, it wasn't. So I already did one.
Oh.
So, yeah, so it was so it's both of us together. So it's both writers together. Yeah, they're repeated together. I didn't really know. So probably not.
Apenas estamos aquí, ¿qué pasa, amigo? Y yo me alegro de que estamos aquí, pero vamos a ver qué vamos a ver mira, estamos los están manchados y no puede ver. No, pero vamos a ver. Oh, mira, she said thank you for the wonderful discussion. Welcome with you. She's the Palestinian faculty member I was telling you about that got the threatening email. It never ends, my friends. It never ends. I'm working, brother. I'm trying. I'm hiring school on the way. And I think this doing this work is complicated. By the way, my friends, I do have water. I have chips and waffles. What's that classroom? 609? This is technical, and I think the students forgot they're supposed to be in the world before. You took it to chamber, you put a sign up at the door in room 609, asking my students to come around and vote. One of them, which is what I said, but.
So the first 3 5, and then.
Yeah, it should be sign, same phrase, not coming back.
Yeah.
My students, come on in. You all have a fantastic memory. Come in. Welcome.
Yeah.
You sit on the right side towards the front so that Pedro can see you. Look at some water, some food, some chips.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, exactly. He doesn't, for the first bracket is tough stuff. But yeah.
The lady was up with that photo.
So I think because of
Yo, I'm not hungry. Oh man, I might be in trouble with my husband. I made him buy chips, he bought water. If you don't want to, that's fine, but nobody likes to read to in a vacuum, you know what I'm saying? So the next group of students is slowly coming in. You can have 2 bags of chips because I got another box under the table. Just saying. Pedro,
Yo.
Al brought his tia, and I think the tia's partner.
Oh, right on.
Hell yeah, man. I'm like, what? I would do the same thing, dude. If I was living in Arizona, I'd bring all my family.
Why
Bring all my
not?
cousins from California.
Yeah.
Ándele, pa' enfrente, mijas. Ahí está bien. Un poquito más pa' enfrente. Eso, muy bien. Did I give you a copy of my book, Pedro? La Bruja in the
Yes,
Orchard?
yes, I downloaded it like
I
yesterday.
would love your feedback, bro. I mean, it's
Yeah.
my bestseller, but I did it without having an editor or a beta reader. I just published it inside.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm juggling a few things, but I will hack away at it, and I'll let you know. You'll be the first to know, obviously.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that sometimes when I tried, no había nadie, Leo? Nobody was up there? Okay, thank you, mijo. When I try to write horror, it becomes speculative fiction or, you know, suspenseful, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
But I learned a lot from listening to you both.
I'm
But I
glad.
put a lot of myself in that short story because my sister used to bully me and beat me up every day.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, and she's got to be pretty dumb not to know it's her, but she doesn't remember doing these things, you know. And then I modeled it after my parents and talked about the struggles of growing up on the border with racism and, you know. So I think that's probably why it rang so true and people really like it. But it's a good piece.
No,
I enjoyed it. I was rereading it again. You know how you set things aside and you're reading, you're like, damn, that was good. I'm like, I wrote that? Like, what? Good job,
Mhm.
me. Oh, what's up?
Yep. Yep.
I'm
Yeah,
not usually that
I get
arrogant.
that too. Definitely. Yeah, I can't wait to dig in and
Cool, cool.
I-
And if you find any typos at all, let me know because I'll totally,
it
totally
happens. It happens. It happens to every
oh, I
single
know, I know.
yeah.
I don't even let it get to me anymore.
Mhm.
You know, I don't because even though I grade a lot of papers, it's not the same thing as editing and copy
Yeah.
editing, not by a long shot.
Mm-mm.
Leo, thank you for doing that. I appreciate you, mijo. So, so we got about a good chunk of students in the year. You know, we got about maybe 7 people on Zoom and then about 20 in the audience. It's not bad, you know. Oh, they're taking their time. We should have told them they were goodies. Also, don't forget, at 1 o'clock, there's a tea candle vigil in room 318. Unfortunately, the faculty that are putting it on are getting pushback from some, you know, some students that are offended by the term genocide, which I think is ridiculous because this is an academic higher institution. And at 3 o'clock, we're going to Barbara's bookstore to see the display on Palestine and then talk about the Rastafari. I'm just going to repeat myself. What's up? Come on in, family. Please, please take something to eat. Grab some water. Grab some chips. Grab some comida. That's the same thing in Spanish. I don't know why I said it like that. How you all doing? How's your energies? Qué bueno. Siéntense para acá. Sit this way. Allá a este lado. So Pedro can see you via Zoom. Hi, Neat. We missed you, mijo. How you doing? Hi. Hello, my friends. You brought a friend, Olivia? No, you didn't. She's a student. Siéntense para allá para que las se vean. Si quieren, siéntense para allá. Don't be shy. Sit on that side. Nah, sit. Extra credit. Just kidding. Nah. Hello, hello. I'm just kidding, Leo. There's no extra credit if you sit on that side. Good Lord. You guys have got too much extra credit. Okay, if you came in too quickly, you want to get a raffle ticket because I'm going to be raffling a copy of Broken Olive Branches and a copy of Julius's book, Endless Steps. Both are outstanding. So I really encourage you to get the tickets. He's also selling copies for super cheap. You're not obligated to buy them, but at the end, we're going to let him sign the copies. See? Please, please grab some chips. I know it's not environmentally cool, but, you know, I did bring bottled water. Sorry. I hope so, dude. I've had a rough week dealing with fascism. I've had a rough week. You know, it takes a lot to bring me down. I had to go to bed at 7:30 yesterday because I was so upset. I'm like, nope, go to sleep. Because I gave up cursing and being angry for Lent. I think I told you. And it's not easy for me because I'm real corajuda, you know. But then I decided to give up sugar and processed food. I'm like, might as well. I'm like, yo, I'm detoxing my mouth and my brain, right? I might as well detox the body. So if I'm low energy or like a little out of it, walking like a sainted zombie, you know why now. Because when you don't eat, you get that, like right now I'm floating. You know what I'm saying? That I'm at the floating stage right now. Shut up. Let's support each other. Let's support each other, Olivia. I'm serious. Caffeine is not. I got my sugar-free caffeine, girl. I'm not gonna do everything. I'm not that. No. Some vices we gotta keep. I'm just saying. Nobody's purely holy. Nobody. I don't care. Nobody. Gracias, tía. Si me puede textear esas fotos, se le apreciaría mucho. Yo, this is gonna be a bilingual event. Hey, just kidding. It's not. We're just gonna wait a little bit because we're running on Harold Washington time. Yeah. So show of hands, who's going to the candle vigil? 1 o'clock. Chale, send your friends. All right, who's going to Barbara's bookstore at 3 o'clock? The Macy's basement. Cool. Who's going to the movies? Remember, I'm buying the popcorn and the bougie fries. Nah. My son, I'm sorry, we're just, shooting the breeze. My son says, Mom, if you figure out what they're saying, can you tell me? I'm like, mijo, we'll just buy the screenplay. Duh. We'll buy the screenplay and watch the movie with the captions. Because some of the movie was difficult to understand. You kind of have to infer by the actions of what's said. Because they kept it true Jamaican. Did not make it easy for the audience. And that's, that's a choice. That's a political choice. Oh, we're still recording? Bro, I forgot to mention we are recording because it wouldn't let me live stream because technology was bullying Jesú. If you need to fix your name or your camera, please do so. The technology is always bullying me. You know this. Sometimes it's cursed. Sometimes. For reals. Okay, I think everybody's here who's gonna be here. All right, well, welcome everybody. Mija in the very back, can you close the door, please? Because I do talk loud. It's not intentional. Oh, no, it's okay. Al, you get comfortable. You get comfortable. Right, so we're going to do round 2 with my second English 102 class. They're all amazing. All my students are great. My name is Dr. Jesús Estrada. If you don't know me, I teach English 102 and creative writing. And I've been bringing speakers since I started working here because I think it's important to have you be, listen to different points of view. And today we have the privilege of having Pedro Iñiguez and Aleco Julius, who are going to talk about their work, especially what it means to be a Chicano in the writing industry. And we're going to focus on horror. And it wasn't on purpose. It just turns out that a lot of the writers I'm bringing this year are horror writers. And so what they're going to do is read for about 5 minutes. Welcome, Ping Kong. And then afterwards, we're going to open it up for question and answers. If you want to unmute and speak your question, you can. If you want to chat it, you can, because I can see it over there. And if you want to speak at the mic, that's perfectly fine. Did everybody get a raffle ticket? Yeah. All right. You all settled? Tia, puedes cerrar la puerta. What's your tia's name? I'm just gonna call you Tia. I've adopted you, Tia. She mine now. All right. So last time Pedro started, so this time we're gonna give Al the first dibs. And so Al is a high school teacher and head of the department, and he has written a beautiful nonfiction book, which I highly recommend for all of you. He is, I mean, I'm just kidding. He's gente, man. He's a brother. I can tell we're gonna be good friends. We text each other sometimes. Just kidding. No, and also we got Pedro Iñiguez here from Los Angeles, who writes in multiple genres. He's published a couple of short pieces in my own press, Body Blues Press, and he's very talented in terms of science fiction, magic realism, but especially horror. So this is a huge honor for them to be with us today. And so Al, take it away, brother. You consider stand. Is it okay if he sits or you want him to stand? Standing? Órale pues. Well, whatever you like, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, I prefer standing whenever, so I'll do that. No, thanks so much, Dr. Estrada. Jesús, I really appreciate the invitation. Come and speak. Thanks for everybody for being here. It's great to be here with everybody. And also, of course, with Pedro, who's an amazing writer. It's really an honor to be here along with you on this conversation.
Likewise.
So I'm glad that you're here. So I'm going to read from an essay out of this book called Endless Depths. The subtitle of my book is called Cosmic Themes, Weird Lore, and Hidden Knowledge. So I've been writing nonfiction for a while, probably seriously for about 4 or 5 years, and had about 20 essays published. I just started writing nonfiction. I'll have my 4th and 5th short stories published later in the spring of this year. What I want to read is an excerpt from an essay called Florilegium Stellarum. If you've never heard of that, that's okay because I made it up. Okay. But they are Latin words, which basically means a notebook of the stars. Okay. So I'll read a little part of that one. What I'll also say too is this part of the book is probably one of the more personal parts of the book. So it doesn't really exemplify the whole book in general, but I just thought that I just felt like it was apt to read that here because as a teacher and as having English and writing students in front of me, I just thought this might be an apt passage. Okay, so this section is called Interstellar Architecture. The architecture of my inner experience has its foundation in the outer reaches. Our bodies and all matter we know of that exists are quite literally composed of stardust. The elements that comprise the organism were once embedded within the churning spheres of gas out there in the vast dark. Dying stars that have exploded in the supernova throughout the past billions of years fashion the particles that make up our brains, our hearts, our skin. Nebula stretching across light years once held the particles of our own creation. Looking up to the night sky, therefore, we look into the deep past of our own elemental creation. The capacity for thought has developed from an epoch of reproduction in the primordial soup to the contemplation of the cosmos in literature and through art. To us, the duration of time seems incomprehensibly long. It is only a blink of astronomical time. At present, while some of us recognize only what we have come to know, some of us thirst for that which has been occulted. All in all, consciousness allows us to negotiate the physical world, to deliberate about our relationship to it, and to apprehend the numinous. Dr. Edgar Mitchell was an astronaut who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences for the study of consciousness. He knew full well the mystical yet very real transformation that one can undergo at the contact point of awareness and the unknown. He is a witness to the immensity of space, and within it, the relative smallness and insignificance of our home planet. His epiphany in space kindled a new kind of understanding and fueled his latter life drive towards studying the intimacies of the inner experience. What Mitchell experienced on his voyage between the moon and Earth is a documented phenomenon known as the overview effect, which represents a fundamental transformation in cognition, or new way of thinking. Seeing isolated Earth against the backdrop of the infinite chasm of space has resulted in numerous other astronauts reporting the very same kind of epiphany, the very same kind of feeling. In his book, The Way of the Explorer, Mitchell theorizes about the ways in which the cosmos are, to echo the words of Henry David Thoreau, revelatory to the soul. What if human consciousness is the universe's way of knowing itself? Bibliophilic baptism. Long before I had encountered these heady ideas in any organized way, I lay my head upon my pillow and projected my youthful imagination. This is where I suppose my journey outward into the cosmos began. During those youthful days, I spent considerable time concealed within the stacks of the small public library near my childhood home. The library was in actuality mere steps away, somewhat squat and unassuming between a few meager grocery stores and hardware stores. Hence, my baptism was by books. Clear are the memories I have of a midweek summer day when the library had just opened its doors and I had the place all to myself. I became familiar with the kindly septuagenarian ladies who placidly carried out the library's daily operations. This sanctuary was unreachable to the bustle and the commotion of the outside world. Slowly pacing up and down the aisles, I remember discovering topics and writers, stacking books up and sitting at the table in the corner to handle them and appreciate them. As I gazed about the towering shelves, at least to my eyes at that stature, I felt at home. Looking back, it was actually a womb-like comfort, but at the same time, the desire for all the knowledge that lay before me was intensely sparked. I recall my imagination being overloaded with the discovery of books that became close to my heart, by writers such as Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and Arthur C. Clarke. This feeling has proven to be an insatiable desire that has never waned. Now, my hearth is my home library, an alchemical lab of letters. Ever since those early days alone in the library, my goal has been to resurrect the sublimity of being ensconced by physical books, sacred vessels of knowledge and feeling. As a hearth radiates warmth, so too does the roaring fire within each book, that collectively the conflagration burns bright. In his book, The Library at Night, Alberto Manguel offers many ways in which the collection of books manifests itself. He declares that the library is at once a myth, it is order, it is power, and it is a mirror of the mind. In his chapter, The Library as Workshop, he writes that for readers, the home library is like a den or a nest, holding the shape of their bodies and offering a container for their thoughts. As a book collector and student of the esoteric, a most vital aspect of my own pathwork has been the notebook. I proffer that this tool is absolutely essential to any seeker on any path. A journal in which to write and one to always keep close to you may take on many forms and purposes. Whether it's to record one's travels or dreams or reading impressions, it is a method to negotiate your inner experience. Every thinker I have admired, whether current or in the past, has kept notebooks. Their modeling was the reason I first started keeping my own notebooks, and their use has become a rather natural extension of my own mind. Thanks.
I super appreciate it even more the second time. So Pedro is going to read a short story for us, and then we're going to open up for question and answer. Go ahead, Pedro.
So yeah, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Pedro Iñiguez. I'm a science fiction and horror writer. I've been writing for about 15 years since my first story was published. I've been published alongside like names like Stephen King and Neil Gaiman, Cynthia Pelayo, Gabino Iglesias, Laird Barron, and lots of other respected authors. So this is a story called Skins, a short story, horror story, is published in Nightmare Magazine a few years ago. So here we go. The morning was cold and overcast, and the few slivers of sunlight that caught on Marlon's body did nothing to warm him in the slightest. He cursed under his balaclava and tried to listen for the sounds of helicopters and schooners over the groan of ice scraping alongside the boat. They had been far out at sea, farther even than most fishing vessels had typically ventured this time of the season. He doubted anyone had followed them to this empty stretch of coastline. There was nothing out here but pain and emptiness. Uncle Harold jumped onto the ice first, wasting no time. When Marlin was certain everything was clear, he cocked his rifle and vaulted over the side of the boat after him. As he landed, the ice beneath his boots cracked. Fuck, he whispered. He took a gentle step forward, using the rifle to steady himself like a tightrope walker. The ice shelf had appeared solid from out at sea, but now he wasn't so sure it would hold long beneath his girthy frame. Hey, Biggie, Uncle Harold said, turning back at him. Get your fat butt over here, kid. I count 5 seals. If we can corral them into a tight kill zone, it'll make our jobs easier. Marlin nodded and trudged ahead as a fierce gust blew in. The cold began to cut into his hands like 1,000 razors. Forgetting his gloves at the docks had been stupid, even for him. He wiggled his fingers to keep the blood pumping, hoping he could still pull off a decent shot when the time came. The last thing he wanted was to screw this up. Hell, he couldn't afford to at this point. He shrugged off the thought and tried to focus. If his uncle was to be believed, he was 5 well-placed shots away from paying off his bookies. Apparently, there was a healthy illicit market for sealskins, meat, and blubber outside the watchful jurisdiction of the Canadian government. Sketchy buyers whose identities were best left anonymous. Put it like this, his uncle had told him. If it exists, there's a market for it. Uncle Harold knew all about stuff like that. He got to know some big players during his stint in prison. Marlin spotted a pair of plump, spotted seal cubs meandering across the ice. Siblings, perhaps. Their eyes glimmered like fresh snowpack in the distance as they belly flopped playfully over one another on the edge of the shelf. He felt a tug at his heart. He wasn't the kind to do this under ordinary circumstances, but he was in a predicament, a life and death sort of bind. A few bad hands at poker could doom a man in extremely horrific ways. Uncle Harold brandished what resembled a pickaxe and brought it close to his chest. Only it was different. The club had a small blunt hammerhead on one end and a long curving hook on the other. What is that thing? Marlin said, raising his voice over the wind's roar. His uncle stroked his gray beard, keeping his eyes fixed on a solitary seal that had strayed from the pack. A haka-pick, he shouted back. After you shoot the things in the head, I'll come in close and smash their skulls with one end and hook their bodies onto the boat with the other. You can guess which side does what. Marlin felt his insides churn. He was glad he was only going to be doing the shooting. A single well-placed shot meant a quick death. Hell, he wouldn't even be doing the skinning. Still, he couldn't help but feel dirty inside. He tried to change the subject. What are you going to do with your share of the money, Uncle Harold? His uncle smiled. Well, Biggie, I wasn't going to tell you until later, but I was planning on giving you my cut. I figured you won't have much left after you pay off your debts, and you'll need something to get you back on your feet. I mean, what's family for, am I right? Before Marlin could respond, a loud crack filled the air. Uncle Harold's head exploded in a burst of hair, flesh, and red chunks before his body toppled to the ground. Another explosion. Something struck Marlin's jaw. He fell beside his uncle's corpse where his blood had canvassed the ice like a bucket of spilled paint. Marlin's face flared with pain as he reached for his rifle. Then came another crack, and his right hand blew apart in a burst of bloody fragments. He howled while his wounds throbbed to the beat of his racing heart. Then came darkness. A few moments in and out of consciousness elapsed before he heard the sound of crunching beside him. These two will do, said a gruff voice. Lots of skin between the both of them. Probably family. Said another. Plenty of nourishment and warmth to be had. The buyers will be pleased. Marlin managed to turn his head slightly. A haka-pick came down on Uncle Harold's spine, the hook lodging itself deep into his tissue. Streaks of crimson trailed his body as it was dragged across the ice. In his peripheral, he spotted the twin seal pups slithering off the shelf and into the sea. He thought about crawling for the edge. It couldn't have been more than 10 meters away. Through the pain, Marlin inhaled a deep breath, and with his remaining hand dug his fingers into a crack in the ice shelf and tried to pull himself forward. As he crawled, his head scraped along the jagged floor, the impact dislodging a few teeth from the cavity in his face. The crunching of ice reared up in the distance again. He lay still, crying. Warm tears streamed down his face, burning as they entered his wounds. That one's lost a hand, called out the gruff voice. Yes. Should still fetch a fair price, the gruff voice added. Lots to work with, lots of skin. The cold began to numb Marlon's body as he lay beside a pool of expanding blood. Before he blacked out, he heard the crunching of ice stop behind him. It was then he was glad he wouldn't feel much before the end. At least, that's what he'd hoped. The end.
Beautiful. There's a lot. All right, excellent. Good, good. Okay, welcome everybody. For anybody who's coming late, we are recording. If you need to fix your camera or change your name. And so we're going to open up to question and answers. I forgot, my helper's gone. If anybody has a question from the audience or via Zoom, that's the highest compliment you can pay these guests because they're not getting a whole lot of honorarium because I'm paying it, right? So anybody want to ask some questions or maybe even about what it's like to be a full-time writer? All right, Olivia. That's why she's getting an A+, y'all.
So I hear that you're both horror writers. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
What got you into horror and specifically writing with the kind of rich and almost grotesque imagery that you have? I mean
Should
that
I
in a
go
good
first?
way.
Okay, sure. Well, horror, I've always found it interesting. I guess it has roots when I was a kid. I would love reading Goosebumps or watching the TV show or the show Are You Afraid of the Dark? And then specifically, my parents used to scare me with tales of like El Cucuy, which is like a Latin American and Mexican kind of boogeyman story. And they'd say he'd get me in the dark if I didn't go to bed and stay in bed. So that thing really traumatized me. So I had a fascination with horror early on, but I grew up on sci-fi, and then I transitioned into writing horror more so later on in life. But basically, horror lets me deal with things that are a little uncomfortable, and it lets me kind of like express myself and my thoughts and my fears through fiction writing. You know, I put myself in situations that I wouldn't like to be in, and I try to cope and deal with those, you know, in that regard. And it's stuff that a lot of people are uncomfortable discussing. Like, for example, I write a lot about cartels, you know, beheadings and flaying people, getting skinned alive, stuff like that, along with more supernatural things, or I mix the two. So those are things that scare me. I wouldn't like to go to Mexico, be kidnapped, and know I'm about to be beheaded by cartels because they thought maybe I was a rival or something like that. So things like that scare me. That's just one example. But people have different fears, and so you know, horror allows you to express those fears and lets you deal with them as a person, but also lets you entertain people with those things too, because it allows people to experience those things from a safe distance. And you know, sometimes when you write out your fears, you come up with answers, but sometimes it raises a lot of questions. And in doing so, you really learn about humanity. And even though there's supernatural terror, sometimes not all horror is supernatural. Sometimes, you know, they're serial killers, but a lot of times, you know, the supernatural elements are metaphors for other things in life. So it's a really neat way of engaging with things that are maybe a little uncomfortable, a little scary for some of us that some of us don't like to deal with in real life. But this allows us to deal with those things in a fairly safe way. So that's why I write horror. It's fascinating. It's always, you know, scared me, and it lets me cope with those things in a real artistic but safe way as well. So it's kind of like a artistic therapy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have
If you have a follow-up, it's fine. Yeah. Oh no, just to answer your question, what got me into horror? And Pedro, he writes in a lot of different styles. My fiction is just basically one kind of style. So not, I'm hopefully branching out to other styles, but mine is more of what's called a weird tale with a capital W. And that when I say capital weird, there is a genre of literature called the weird tale or the weird story. That's pretty when you in terms of like art or like history, it's pretty new, only about 120 years. You can look at, you know, think of some of the inspiration before that. And some Edgar Allan Poe was like one of my gods. So I'll talk about Poe, I'm sure, many times today. But the weird tale is stories where there's something unusual, unknown happening. And I think that's the scariest thing that for me is the fear of the unknown, of not knowing something, not knowing might be there. And I think with horror too is what's fascinating to me is that with every other kind of literature, it's very intellectual. So you have it might have an emotional, intellectual reaction, but I think with really good horror, it's also visceral and very bodily and very physiological. You can have a physiological reaction to horror, which I did already a couple of times with Pedro's brutal story. So I think that fascinates me also because there isn't a lot of art, I think, that can really affect you in that way. Maybe some movies, but it's done very well. But I think that if you can do it with a language, I think that's something that really always sort of fascinated me. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
You had another question, Olivia?
Yes, I do. Pedro, you brought up the fact that it raises a lot of questions about humanity, and I'm curious if either of you can answer. What questions do you think you've raised about humanity through your writing?
So it depends on each individual writer. For me, I bring up a lot of themes about like troubled. I write about characters that are troubled. I actually write about repentant sicarios, cartel killers. I write about maybe people who are substance abusers who are trying to find redemption. So a lot of my characters are troubled. They're not your everyday people. For example, like this guy right here in this story, he was about to kill some seal pups, and obviously he's had a gambling addiction that led him to some debts. So my questions usually are, can people find redemption in a horrible world? They're not heroes in the common sense. Sometimes they're not heroes at all. It's just sometimes the universe is cold and uncaring and cruel. And within that context, can my characters find redemption? And there's a lot of questions to be raised. We do bad things to each other as humans, and can we ever break out of that, or is that just in our nature? Will we always be like this? So it depends on each individual writer. They all write about different things that, different themes. And so those are some of the questions in my writing that I raise. Sometimes there are no answers. Sometimes you find slivers of answers within the characters themselves. If you read any of my work, you'll find some of that. But for me, I guess it's a lot about cruelty and whether we can overcome that. And can bad people find redemption? A lot of my stories are people who are repentant or trying to do better, not just be good, but just be better than their former selves. A lot of my characters are pretty damaged in that regard. So, those are some of the things I raise in my writing.
No, that's a good question too. I think that what Pedro was talking about, the complexity of the human condition, and to answer like your question more directly, what are we trying to? You say what we were trying to answer? Human nature, yeah. So most of my writing is nonfiction. So I'm fascinated by what's been lost, like what stories are out there that people don't know. And I feel like when I come across some ideas or some stories, whether it's from history or a very interesting person, and I ask people about it, nobody knows anything about it. I feel like it's almost like my calling to I want people to know. I want to write about this person who contributed to science or contributed to art. And not only that, but put it in his real human cultural context. So I'm super fascinated by a few writers. One of them's name is Lawrence Weschler. And I didn't really know anything about him about 10 years ago. He's an amazing essay writer who can take any idea, any topic, and point to anything in our room and tell you the fascinating history behind it. But what might seem boring or very sort of mundane, he can bring out the people that were involved in bringing that and coming that together with just very real people like you and me, who experienced something in the past or bringing together other ideas that might not seem like they go together. One essay that he wrote that really inspired me was that after the September 11th attacks, he looked at photographs in a magazine, and it was Time magazine or something. And he realized that he thought that he'd seen these photographs before, but it didn't make any sense. Like, how could he have seen these photographs before? And when he realized that all the photographs in this pictorial were similar to Civil War photographs and soldiers after the battle. So he saw these photographs, there were firefighters sitting after an exhausting 24 hours of working through the rubble and trying to rescue people after the 9/11 attacks. And they had the same reaction as people in the Civil War. And I thought that's something, and that really inspired me. And it's just kind of bringing together human nature across time and this similar experiences across time. And I want to do that in my writing.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, there's a question on the screen.
Does your writing material come from research, prior experience, or mainly imagination? That's from Leah. That's an they've all been excellent questions. Who wants to take that one?
I can go first. It's fine. All three of those. I do a lot of research, especially with the longer the work, the more research I do. But I do read a lot of books, both for fun and for research. And if you read for fun, you're bound to find something that's interesting that you'll use as an idea later. So either way, you can't lose. Life experiences. So the more life experiences you have, the more things inspire your writing. You see more things in the world, and again, those all go into the collective scrap heap of ideas that you may or may not use later on down the road. And of course, your imagination is kind of like the glue that strings it all together. So, you make a what if, you see something happen in life, and you put a speculative context to it, especially in genre writing, and you do research just to kind of fill in those gaps to make it as relatable as possible. So it's kind of like a fusion of all those things. Something in real life might inspire something. You want to know more about that. You do research to make it believable to the reader, and then you use your imagination by how you tell the story and the words and the format that you do it. And so all of that, it's a combination. They're all related, and so they're all very equally important. But imagination is very important. Even if you don't have research, if you don't have life experiences, imagination is still the most important thing, because, fantasy worlds don't exist. There's no research to be done about that. You can create whatever world you want in your head. You don't need to do research for that. You just, it's optional, but to make it more believable, you can definitely do that. But everything in life itself is what inspires stories. So anything in the world, if it exists, it's a possible story idea one day. So yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, to follow up on what you just said, anything in the world that exists could spark a story. That I've heard that before from writers before I started writing fiction, but actually it's true. So what I read earlier about carrying a notebook is definitely something that I do, because I've already gotten ideas just today, a couple of ideas. And also for me, it's mostly is research. So I'll come across something and have an idea for it. And I'll give you an example. I wrote a cosmic horror story in this book that actually Pedro's also in, called Anterior Skies, a collection of cosmic horror short stories. But the idea that I got for it is because I was reading some Great Lakes history, so the history of Lake Michigan. And there was this one story in there in the 1840s. There was a boat that left the Chicago shoreline. There were 7 men and 1 woman on the boat, and it hit a storm and came back. Actually, it sank. They took the lifeboat back. The 7 men arrived back, and the woman wasn't with them. And nobody knew what happened, and they were very dismissive about it, the 7 men. And that's a true story. And I thought for myself, I said, what if I could write a fictional story that somehow the woman who drowned gets revenge on them all, and they all end up drowning in the lake somehow later in their life. I just thought that was so I took a real life event, but I thought, what if there's another sort of element of the unknown that takes place? So I think that is from research. Most of my stories come that way, where there's something that I come across that's a true story, an actual event, and you kind of twist it in some way to make it to have more of a direct sort of impact.
Yeah,
I
so
want-
I can speak.
Oh,
Go ahead. I can
I just
speak
want to do a
that real
quick follow-up.
quick.
That story was really good. It was so well researched that it felt real, and it scared me, because it was
Nice.
that is the important part of research, that when you do research something so well. I read that story, and it was like lifelike, and that to me was scary. So great job on that, Al. That was a good story.
No, thank
I'm
you.
gonna definitely buy that anthology. Like, I don't have enough books to read. No, I was gonna speak briefly because, I interview a lot of writers, and one of the things look, I'm a huge Paul Tremblay fan. I call him Paulito behind his back and in front of his face, and we communicate regularly. But one of the things he said is, like, as a writer, you kind of have to be like a magpie. A magpie will make a nest out of anything, pieces of trash, heather, whatever. And it's true. It's true for me as well. And yes, our experiences inform our writing. But I remember one time, I was like Pedro and probably Al. My mom would scare us, and it was a lot of time misogynist story. Like, if you dress like a slut, you're gonna get taken by the devil, or if you don't obey your parents, and it's always a woman that gets punished, right? Usually. But what I was thinking about in all these stories, the person who gets kidnapped by the devil and then redeems himself is gone for 3 days and 3 nights. And I wondered what happened during those 3 days and 3 nights, because we don't know. We just see the aftermath of them being scratched up by the devil and coming back all humble and whatnot. And so I wrote a story called The Extravagant Stranger, where a lot of the tropes follow the folklore that I was taught, and the devil takes a young girl who is rebellious and she's independent, and I narrated what happened in those 3 days and 3 nights. And I think the other thing I did was personify who the devil was, but gave him more depth, because a lot of times the devil is seen as a deceiver, but really he's teaching a morality lesson. He releases them. And so I kind of went through the inner struggle, the outer struggle of what he had to do as a devil to punish this young girl who was very beautiful. He kind of like starts to fall in love with her, so there's that weird tension, you know. But I agree, and to Pedro's point, not that you want to go into a research vortex, but research is very important. And the more you research, the better your story will be. And it doesn't mean you have to use everything. And even poets, you can research too. You know, research, you know, skills that you don't know, interview people, go to a library, for crying out loud, look at an encyclopedia, right? Because even if you don't use the information at the moment, it'll add credibility to whatever you're working on. I do the same thing for you know, nonfiction writing, because I do a lot of political writing and whatnot. So I really encourage you not just to research, but also to read. We talked about this earlier. I don't think you can be a successful writer if you're not reading everything, right? And I'm not just talking about horror. I'm talking about the news. I'm talking about how-to books, books on psychology, books on the cosmos, right? One of my favorite writers, Tango Easton Martin, is the A. San Francisco Poet Laureate. I have a huge crush on him, and he knows it. You know, he betrayed me, though. He had a baby recently. Let's get it. But Tango reads everything, and you can see it in the backdrop of his apartment. He's got stacks and stacks of books, and he is so intelligent and so humble, but his poetry is just amazing, or he wouldn't be the A. San Francisco Poet Laureate. You know what I'm saying? So you got to balance both out, right? But the only thing I will say is give yourself a time limit of researching, because I've also seen writers that research and research and research and they don't write. You got to hit your schedule regularly, or wherever you go that inspires you, right? You got to make it a practice that's yours, you know? Does that make sense? All right, excellent. Let me see. Well, I'm going to ask the question I asked you earlier, because maybe the answers will vary. Because one of the things I wanted them to talk about is what it means to be a Chicano in a predominantly white industry, and it's still very predominantly white. We're actually rare, like 3 Chicano nerds in one room. Like, what? Seriously, that's awesome. I'm gonna probably like relive this moment over and over again because it's so unusual. But who have been influences, horror influences that are people of color for both of you? And if anybody wants to take that question.
I could start. I think that my answer probably won't necessarily vary from before, but I think that when you ask the question, who is like a Chicano or Latino writer in horror, I'm not sure. I never sort of like grew up knowing them or seeing them, but I think that for one Latino writer was very influential for me is Victor Villaseñor, because what he did, and I use the term, he built like cathedrals to the families and generations of people who came from Mexico and came to the United States and had children and grandchildren, and seeing that and being just so enthralled, not just with the story, because it wasn't really represented in a lot of the books that I'd read just for school, right? But also it's like the skill that with which he was able to create a story and so many characters that spanned 100 years or more. And that's still like a goal of mine. I don't know what the epic's going to look like some years down the road, but to be able to do something like that, like I have in the back of my mind just like this weird horror epic of a multi-generational family. And I know there's a couple of other writers who've kind of done that, but Victor Villaseñor's work, I think, is definitely somebody who, or a person who in his books really inspired me.
Favorite work by him?
A good question. I think it's the Burro Genius, which I think is nonfiction, which is interesting because I just talked about this. Reign of Gold is the great one also, but Burro Genius is really funny also. So Reign of Gold is the one that I would recommend for a multi-generation family, but Burro Genius, I think, could be very resonant for a lot of people today.
That's a great title. I haven't read Villaseñor, so I'm going to start. Pedro, what about you?
Sure. Like I told the last class before, when I grew up, there weren't any Chicano writers that I knew of, or Latino writers, or people of color. I, when I was a kid growing up reading books, white authors, because that's all we knew. That's all the world knew, really, especially in the States. Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Stephen King, Clive Barker, uh, you know, Arthur C. Clarke, Dennis Etchison. Those were like my influences growing up. And you would go to bookstores and you would not see people of color writing fiction. And so when I was a teenager, when I was going to college, I was thinking to myself, are people of color not writing? Are we just not interested in these things? Are we not, but that wasn't the case. I had bought into that, and it's just that there's gatekeeping going on in publishing for so long that there are so many people of color that were writing all these years, but they weren't getting published. And that's probably because there's certain biases in the publishing industry that still exist today. Now you're seeing more people of color getting published, getting big book deals. You're going to see them in magazines and anthologies now. Whereas when I started writing 15 years ago, I'd be the only person of color on a table of contents for a magazine or a book or an anthology or whatever. And when I started writing, I was thinking the same thing as when I was a kid. Like, are we not writing these stories? No, it's just that there's a lot of biases in the publishing industry. And even now, it's only like a small percentage of people of color that are getting these deals and, getting published as compared to white authors. So I grew up within that bubble. So my influences were all white authors. There weren't any black authors, there weren't any Latino authors, there weren't any Asian authors. The only one that I really came across was in high school because it was required reading, was House on Mango Street by Sandro Cisneros. And that was my only exposure to a person of color's writing. And now that I look back at it, it's so sad. But now we're starting to see some voices come in, and so I did not grow up with any people of color, or specifically Chicano writers, as influences. But now I'm definitely exposed to that world, and I'm reading a lot more. A lot of my fellow writers are people of color, and I'm reading widely across all that. And the Stoker winners from last year are, Gabino Iglesias and Cintia Pelayo, and they're the first Latinos, specifically Puerto Ricans, to win the Stoker Award ever. So you're finally starting to see some headway, but we're still a long way. So unfortunately, hopefully the new generation of kids can find a wider selection of authors to choose from, and they all have unique voices that you wouldn't have gotten from white authors. There's different life experiences. They're all unique but equal in different ways. If that makes sense. So it's important to read widely, and now I have that luxury and that privilege, but before, it was never like that at all. So you're just starting to see that change now. So now I have influences who are people of color, like Gabino and Cintia Pelayo and V. Castro. So it's nice to see that now. So it is a very different world from when I grew up. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, "What the what?" Because I hadn't even heard of Cintia Pelayo. I'll be honest. Cintia Pelayo is a Chicago writer. She writes a lot of crime noir, and so does Gabino Iglesias. Gabino lives in Texas, and in fact, I'm bringing them in March, and I'm hoping to fly Gabino in because I got the ticket donated, and I'm gonna put him up in a hotel, which raises a whole other issues because I shouldn't be paying for all this stuff, but whatever. But they are so talented and so humble and very open to communicating. You know what I mean? Because we still are rare. You know what I mean? People like us who have gotten degrees in English that are Latinx or people of color are not typical. And in fact, I was dissuaded from getting a PhD in English, and I was told it was going to be a waste of time. Well, haha on you, right? But the other thing too is like I own an independent charity press called Body Blues Press. He owns his own press, and I'm telling you, I know the editors of Somos en Escrito. I know the Flower Song Press, Masa Dio and David Romero that just started their press recently. I know these people because we're so few. You know what I mean? And we support each other. A lot of times we talk about how difficult it is to market and whatnot. But because it's a hustle whether you're traditionally published or not, because the writers, the Stephen Kings, the J.K. Rowlingses are not the rule; they're the exception, and you really have to work hard. A lot of published writers, like Cintia Pelayo, is a social media expert. She's got an MFA. She's getting currently a PhD, but she has a full-time job. Paul Tremblay, Paulito, he's a full-time teacher at a private school, and he has to because he's got small kids and needs benefits. You know what I mean? I'm the same way. I love you all know I love my job. If I won the lottery, I would still do this job. But without this job, I couldn't write. I couldn't own Body Blues Press. For cover design, for software, for all the things you need to produce books, because it costs money, right? And so I think even now. And another thing that I was telling the students earlier, it's not just that the publishing houses won't take writers of color a lot of times. It's also that the works that are translated are not being translated from Latin America and Africa, African countries and other places, right? Now with technology, that's changing, but it's still difficult. Like, I was getting my master's. Whoa, did this thing just die? I was getting my master's back in the 1997. I was a big nerd. I got my master's in a year. And I took a class on translation, and the bias was visceral, right? The people that were being translated were predominantly white men from Europe, not Latin American writers, not people from Nigeria, not people from China. You see what I mean? And the interesting thing to me now is that there is a huge market in China and India. The poetry community is thriving there because they also have a different relationship to the arts. So the technology is making it possible for a lot of people to independently publish and traditionally publish, but you still have to hustle. You still have to hustle to sell your books. You have to hustle to find an agent. You have to hustle to get that movie contract. And even then, it doesn't mean it's going to pay out. I know a writer who works here. His name is Mark Miller. He's had 2 movies produced. He's published 4 novels. And the payment has been like maybe a month's rent. It's not like he made a whole lot of money. You know what I mean? It's not about that. I think for a lot of us, it's a labor of love. Like, I don't have to be up at 3 a.m. writing. I'm sure Al doesn't have to be doing that either because he's got a full-time job too. But we love the craft. You know what I mean? Yeah. So actually, to transition, because I think it's important for them to get a feel. Pedro, can you talk about your experience and maybe how you came to that decision about being a full-time writer? I find that story. I just love hearing the story.
Yeah. So I started writing 15 years ago, but back then I was going to school. I had a job, and I was writing on the side, and every now and then I'd have like a story published, maybe tops 5 in a year if I was having a good year. But I was working retail, and I got tired of it. I have a lot of anxiety, and it just wasn't for me. So I saved up a lot of money on my 401k. I saved a little over $20,000, and I pulled it all. And I said, I'm just gonna write, see how it goes, just write full time. And so I've been doing that for about 4 or 5 years now. Doing what I can, and I've had a lot of achievements since then, a lot bigger than when I was just doing it on the side. And I've averaged about 20 publications a year now, over the last like 3-4 years now, and I've gotten a lot of things done and a lot of cool deals going on now. So I've got 2 book deals that I can't discuss yet that are going to come out soon. I'll have news for that. And I'm writing a comic book that's going to come out later this year as well, and that pays really well. And so a lot of great opportunities that I've had presented to me, or that I've took upon myself to create because of that now. But I do want to share that the realistic side of that is that it's not sustainable unless you're getting big contracts, which very, very few writers do. Like, unless you're getting big money from the big top 4 or 5 publishers like Macmillan or Random House or Penguin. Or unless you're getting movie deals on the side from your books, which I am not. So it's not something that's sustainable unless you're making big money, and most authors don't. So it's something that if you're trying to be a writer, you should be aware of that. It is hard. You have to treat it like a full-time job to get any kind of traction. But it is possible. Of course, it's possible. You put in enough work, or if you write something that someone will like enough, then you get paid for it. And so do know that if you want to get serious about writing, don't treat it as a hobby. Treat it as a full-time job. If that's the route you want to go with. If you want to just write on the side because it's a passion of yours, and maybe you want to publish something every now and then that's cool too. You treat it that way. But if you want to get serious about it, and if you want it to take you further, you have to really treat it with seriousness. Because when I started, I was just I like getting published every now and then. It was a cool feeling getting paid for it and doing it on the side. But now I really took it to heart. So It's not, like I said, it's not sustainable. Eventually I'll have to get a job because the money's dwindling down. And, you know, and it's not like the money I do get is enough. Like, for example, professional market, if you sell a good story, you might get a few $100s for it, maybe $300-400 for it. So, and the comic book thing, I can't discuss quite yet, but it's significantly more than that. But not enough to sustain you unless you're getting big contracts, which very, very few people do. And, you know, so that's part of the cool things about being a full-time writer is that you get to do it, you know, as long as you want, really from the comfort of your home or wherever you feel comfortable writing. But the downside is obviously it's still a losing game for the most part in regards to if you want to make a living off of it, it's very, very hard. But it is fun and I am passionate about it, but that's something to consider if that's what you want to do as a career. So just some of the, you know, realities of it.
I'd like to follow up on that to talk a little bit about how I got started in a sort of different way than Pedro. I know that you've done it a little bit longer than I have, but the way I got into writing is because I was reading magazines and journals and books that I that were anthologies that I like to read and topics that I like to read about. Zines from all over the world, magazines from different places about folklore, about interesting history about a certain culture, whatever it is. And I started collecting zines and books. And after a while, I looked at them and said, well, I could have contributed to this. I had an idea for that would fit right in here. I have an idea that would fit right in here in this book or this magazine. So after doing that for several years and collecting that, I said to myself, well, this was 2020, late 2019, 2020, when I started looking at these books saying, I think I can do this. So what I did is just literally looked inside the book, looked at their mailing or information or email, and contacted them and said, I'm interested. First of all, I love your magazine. I'm interested in writing for you. And a lot of them got back to me saying, that's great. What's your idea? And I gave them my ideas, and some of them didn't work out, but some of them did. And like Pedro said, it's great to see your name in print and getting paid a little bit. But then what happens is that it kind of is addicting. So after 1 year, then I'm interested in writing some more, and I want to contribute to this magazine and that magazine. And sometimes I feel like I bite off more than I can chew. I do have a full-time job and a family with a full schedule, but like Jesú said, yeah, sometimes I am up at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. It's because I'm really passionate about getting that completed. And don't forget that I was in your shoes at some point. This might seem very distant and foreign to you, but it's really not. Okay, because I was in the same position. I'm just a teacher. I was a writing student, just like you are also. So I suggest, like, we live in a city where there are a lot of events happening. Like probably today, this weekend, there are writers talking about their books, and they want to talk to you. They do. There's so many great bookshops here, just in Chicago. And if follow them on social media, look at their schedules. I know that I mentioned the Chicago Reader last session that they often list book events. So go out and meet the authors and ask them those questions. I'm sure that in my experience, if you are interested in a writer, they're interested in talking books with you also. So that's one thing that I always like to do, and I still do that at least once a month, to meet a writer and say, just introduce myself and ask them about their writing and how they got into writing, and that's something I'm interested in. I think that's something that is very manageable here, especially in Chicago, where there's things happening all the time.
Yeah, I agree. And even I mean, I think Cynthia's my sister now. Not like I think because I'm a weirdo and I'm stalking her. No. She's got, other stalkers, but not just kidding. Like, and there's something about writers that are very generous. A lot of them, not all of them. You'll find some arrogant ones that don't want to have anything to do with you. But like, I communicate with Cynthia almost on a daily basis. We just give each other solidarity. You know what I mean? I message Gabino at least once a week. One, because I want him to make up his mind about coming here. But people are very open. Paul responds to my messages. Paul Tremblay is busy. And it's not because I'm bringing him here. It's because he wants to share his knowledge. You know what I'm saying? And so writers do want to share their work. They want to broaden that audience. And so I think that's a really valid point. And Chicago's thriving. Plus, I think Printers Row has a great book fair. If you haven't been, I know that there are a lot of really great free virtual events. like Tango Easton Martin, I should post it on the Brightspace site for you. He has an event coming up on revolution and poetry at the end of February. And that's going to be like hybrid like this. You know, this is also becoming more popular because it is cheaper, you know, to have somebody come via Zoom than flying. You know what I mean? And that there's opportunity for these events as well. So there's a richness in there and a possibility for you to engage with other writers or artists and musicians, whatever craft you're into. You know what I'm saying? So that's also a possibility as well. Just show of hands, how many of you are writers or you would like to be a writer? Beautiful. David, I think you should ask a question since you were the one that suggested I invite Al. Thank you, David. You want to ask him a question? Look. Wait.
It's more of a simple question, but what's your writing process like?
Oh, that's not such a simple question.
Mhm.
So what is your writing process like? And I want to speak to that as well.
Pedro, you want to take that one or should I go first?
You can go first. You're right there.
Okay. Well, I don't have an answer. That's why I wanted Pedro to go first.
Okay.
I was just going to kind of think about what you were going to say, and then I was going to make something up. Obviously a great question. You said it's a simple question, David. I know you. I know you have that dark sense of humor. I don't think it's a simple question. But like for me, my writing process is that, again, coming across something that I read a lot of times, and it could be a news item, or it could be something in a book about history, whatever it is, and asking this question afterward: what if? And those are like two words for me, especially when it comes to my fiction writing. If I talked about that previous story about the ship that foundered and sank on Lake Michigan. Now, what if the one person who died would get revenge? Another example is another story that I read. I was reading this. See, it's like a rabbit hole. So I watched this documentary about climate change. And I was watching, and there were, you'd see photographs of the ice shelves and at the poles and how they're kind of melting at an unbelievable and alarming pace, right? So I was interested in that, and I got a few other books about climate change over the last couple of years, and I was reading about them, and I came across this chapter about the glaciers and icebergs in Scandinavia, okay, and there's this mythology I didn't know about, that in Scandinavia, Northern Europe area, is that for part of the myth and folklore of their culture is that they believe that icebergs and glaciers are sentient. They have a consciousness, and they don't necessarily, but it's part of their mythology, right? That they're invigorated with some kind of spirit, and that doesn't leave. And some of them are positive, some of them are negative. But that's part of it. And in other Scandinavian cultures throughout the centuries, I have this belief system or this mythology, and I had no idea about it. So I thought those two words, like, what if, right? Because we live in an area that's made up of glaciers and the Great Lakes. I keep coming back to that. I'm very interested in history of like the Great Lakes and like Michigan and Chicago history and things, and they were also created by glaciers. And I thought, well, what if there is some glacier that still exists, and actually it is. It is a real phenomenon. You can look it up. There's actually unmelted ice at the bottom of many of our lakes. And I thought, what if that mythology is real, and what if it exists here? And what if there are spirits that live in the ice here in Lake Michigan? And what if, because of the ice melting, they're being released in the world? And I thought that, so one thing leads to another. So I guess my writing process is really just thought process of going through the rabbit hole, following where it leads, and one of the best compliments I got about my book was a reader who reached out and said, your book opened up a lot of doorways because my bibliography. So I appreciate that, there might be like a spark of an idea, but it might take you to a place you don't necessarily realize. Just like I was watching a climate change documentary, and I ended up writing about spirits that are being released because of from like the ice that exists in Lake Michigan.
Pedro?
Yeah, the writing process, that's not an easy question because it's very complicated because it changes from story to story, from day to day. So basically the general of it for me is I'll do a lot of reading. I'll get an idea. Something will spark it, either from like, you know, like Al said, like from the news or from an article or from a nonfiction book I happen to be reading. Sometimes even from another fiction book I'm reading, something will be sparked from there. Sometimes things that spark my ideas are just life, you know, something that happened to me or someone I know, sometimes good things or bad things, but then that's the germ of the idea. And then, you know, you add the what if, which is at the heart of any basically great speculative fiction story, which includes fantasy, science fiction, horror, magic realism, any of that. So yeah, then that gets the seed of an idea going. Then I'll jot down some notes. Like Al said, having a notebook is very important. I have like 5 here on my desk right now with all various different kinds of notes. And then I'll start outlining a story. And so basically it goes from reading, idea, you know, notebook, outlining, and then I start the writing process. This is a very big, broad simplification of it, but then I'll start writing either a short story or a novel or a poem or whatever I feel like it's going to be. So it's very complex to answer that, but everyone has their own unique writing process. But basically I write from the hours of like 8 or 9 p.m. to like sometimes like 5 in the morning. I write better at night, so that's part of my writing process, because the world is kind of quieted down. You don't hear the hum of cars in the background. You don't really hear people talking. It's just you and the world. It's a little more peaceful and tranquil. So for me, that gets my imagination going a little more. So that's part of my individual writing process. I know a lot of people wake up early to write because that's best for them. So I'm the opposite of that. So it depends on what works best for you, what you're most comfortable with, what gives you more peace of mind, that lets the thoughts flow freely. You know, it varies from author to author, but that's just my process. Basically, get an idea, start outlining a story. I would first ask myself, what if, you know, something, you know, kind of like what Al said, you think of something interesting and you apply, what if this happened in our world, or what if this good thing became a bad thing, you know? So what if electric powered vehicles were actually worse than gas powered vehicles? What would cause that? And you just write a science fiction story off of that. Or, you know, what if there were cartels in the US instead of Mexico? You know, switch things up. Or what if there was a big cataclysm in the United States and now everyone was trying to migrate to Mexico, but now Mexico's putting up the fences and they don't want to let anyone in, right? That's a great what if that leads to speculative elements. So turn the tables on the, you know, the common everyday thing. So, and then you start to writing. You know, if you say you want to write a short story, well, what's the end goal of that short story? What do you want to say in those few words? What do you want to tell your audience? Do you just want to entertain them? Do you want to make them think, leave them with a question? So it depends on a lot of things, but that's generally my writing process. Just think of an idea, get sparked by something, ask what if, what do I want to say, jot down an outline in my notebook or on the computer, whatever is best for you. Find a place to write and just start writing your story. I know it's very broad, but that's just, you know, all I can give you here. It depends on the person. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to just give you the best advice I learned from Matt Cedillo that I've taken to heart, and that is each one of you is going to have your own process, and it's going to vary project to project. How you write a poem is going to be different than how you write a short story, than how you write a play. But how I do mine is I get an idea, like Pedro was saying, but I think about things. So there's a thing called a plotter and a pantser. You write by the seat of your pants, and I very much write by the seat of my pants. Kind of like a lecture in class. You always notice I don't have class notes, right? Which is cool, you know. But I tend to start with a strong character and then give them a goal, and that's where the story starts. I you know, have some kind of conflict in the beginning. The only thing I do map are escalating conflict, struggles, and resolution, whether they're internal or external. You know what I mean? And I have a sense of what the ending will be, because I haven't played the movie out in my head yet, right? But I'll let the characters do what they must, and the story comes true. Or I'll give you an example. I was writing this novella in a series, and I wanted the protagonist to go to Mexico, and for some reason she went to Canada, and that's where she ended up, you know. And so and research is also important. I don't always research at the beginning. I'll write the story and then fill in the gaps. You know what I mean? Like I wrote a climate change story that was inspired by a devolution writer. I was trying to write a devolution story. A devolution story is where something cataclysmic happened and society just devolves, and there's nothing they can do about it. And so this beautiful writer had written stories about babies that were born that were basically vegetables, They were never going to develop consciousness, and this is happening globally. And it's not a typical dystopian piece of literature like what we're reading. There wasn't like fighting or fascism or whatever, just society's ending. And so I wanted to write a devolution story, but it turned out to be a climate change story, right? And I knew a lot about climate change because I'd interviewed experts and read articles. But what I didn't know about was hunting. And so my husband had been hunting deer in Wisconsin because that's where he's from. But I interviewed my cousin. I looked stuff up online. I saw YouTube videos. And even though I didn't use all that research, it really made for a very rich scene in that one story. You know what I mean? I think it's important that you research details because your readers will call you out on it. But for me, it's a different process. I am a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. But by the time I've sat down, I have a clear idea of who the main character is, what their desire is. And I also revise a number of times. I do have beta readers. I tend to collectivize a lot of my writing, whether it's political articles, whether it's speeches, whatever. And when I'm done, I'll send it to a couple of beta readers that I really trust, and they'll flip it back to me right away. And if you're going to do that, you got to return the favor. You can't just be mining people for their time because they're busy, right? Because writing for a living is a hustle, you know? And so a lot of times we'll quid pro quo favors. Like I just asked a friend of mine to copy edit. He volunteered. He's copy editing an anthology for me, even though I've had it professionally copy edited already. And then I'm going to read his novel. You know what I mean? And I'm also going to do what he's doing, edit it and give it feedback. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, that's tangent. But my point is that if that's part of your writing process, return the favor. And don't be offended if you ask people to read your work because they won't. You know, don't be offended if your family doesn't read your stories because they won't. You know what I mean? But hang on to those people that do because they're a treasure, right? That friend that reads all your work, they're a treasure. And listen to what they're saying, because a lot of times if 2 or more readers tell you something about a story, you better pay attention, even though you own the work. Does that make sense? But what I think is really important is that you read regularly, even if it's 15 minutes a day. Even if you write 15 minutes a day, do what you can, because those 15 minutes are going to end up being a long story by the end of the week. I write for hours, and you know, I kind of word vomit. I know that's a very vulgar metaphor, but I think very quickly and I process very quickly and I word vomit. So when I write for 3 hours, I'll produce a story. But not everybody functions like that. I also very rarely get writer's block. We haven't talked about that. Think of a writer's block as an opportunity. You have to solve a mystery now, right? You have to figure out what direction you want to take your story in. Too, if those of you who are writers get writer's blocks, don't see it as a negative thing. You know, don't ever see your art as a negative thing. See it as a positive thing because you love it so much. Because that negativity is not going to help you produce. The same thing as when you write your essays. Like if you keep telling yourself you can't write, you can't write, you can't write, well, guess what's going to happen? You're not going to write. You see what I'm saying? So, okay, enough preaching from your teacher. But other questions or thoughts? Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. There is a question here. I'll give you the.
You can read the top part of it. I like to become a writer, but I focus too much on the flow of words already being perfect during the rough draft that I don't allow the ideas to come out freely. What advice do you have to get past that? Well, I can start and I can say that I'm not sure if I know exactly what you mean. I think I do, but sometimes the best advice is just to stop and let it stew and just put it aside for a while. Jesú, you said that your process is to write and do the word vomit and the amount of words come out. So it doesn't work at all for me. I have to stop. If I don't feel like it's working, I'll just basically stop. And it's always good. And sometimes it's good to be working a couple different things at once. You can switch to something else. Like there have been days where I feel like I'm writing for 3-4 hours. I have maybe like a Saturday night or something where I have time to write a lot, and I barely get out like 250 words, and I feel like I just ran a marathon. We'll just have little, and 250 words is like 9 sentences, So it definitely I do identify with the idea of I think you said how the words are coming out rather than the ideas. But one thing that it's a suggestion that might work is that sometimes if I'm writing fiction, I introduce a character that's kind of represents me, and I talk to the character that's having a problem. And that's actually worked in something that I wrote, that a whole new character came in and started talking to the character that I didn't know what to do with exactly. I kind of had the ending, but I wasn't sure how to get from point A to point B. And I knew that it would be an impactful story that I wanted to write, but I wasn't sure how to get past like how to get through what the road was looking like. So I introduced another character that had a conversation with this character and it worked out. So maybe introducing something new into the work.
Pedro?
Yeah, so it sounds like if I'm getting the question right, is that you're too concerned with the word flow that you can't even finish it. So it sounds like you're being a perfectionist, which is common with writers, but you have to remember that you're in the you're working towards the service of the story, which wants to come alive first and foremost. So completing it is the goal. So get whatever words you can, even if they're not perfect to you or if they don't sound right to you, just get them all down and just complete the story. Go from point A to point B, and then worry about the word flow later. That's where the editing process really comes in. That's where the story really comes alive. And shines is in the editing process. So, but first and foremost, like I said, the story wants to come alive. You're there to take care of it and make sure that happens. So complete the story. Don't worry about the word flow. The magic really happens in editing. That's when you tweak the words and you can cut sentences and pick better words. And so word flow should not be the main factor you should be worried about when you're writing a story. First and foremost, get whatever ideas you can down on the page, get it done. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but if what's really blocking you from achieving that is the word flow, don't worry about that. That's something that you do in editing. So first and foremost, get it done. That's my advice in that regard.
I agree with Pedro, not just for creative writing, but for your essays. The best dissertation I got was from a faculty member from Northeastern, and all he said was this: it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to get done. And then after that, I finished my dissertation, I got my doctorate. I'm not playing. But I do think that there's a time and a place for that hyper editor. And I've coached a lot of my students through this process. You don't want to completely invalidate a student who raised that question. You want to say, I hear you. Now's not the time. You can come in later when it's editing time, because that also shows that you love your craft, right? But get it done first. It doesn't have to be perfect, but then bring in that editor later, because that editor right now is going to stop you from producing your words, and you don't want that. And like Mijo said, you think of the story like you're nurturing a baby. You wouldn't stop feeding it. You wouldn't stop taking care of it. You want to let it develop as it's supposed to, right? You see what I'm saying? But it's not always going to be time to change a baby's diaper. Come on now. You know what I mean? You wait till the baby poops later, much later, after it eats, and you play with the baby one, all right? I don't know if that metaphor is working for you, but you gotta trust the process, and you gotta trust yourself. I'll tell you one of the most dramatic things one of my students had to do, because it was week 8 and he hadn't produced anything, and I knew he had a really, really harsh internal editor. He literally visualized himself shooting it in the head with a gun. And I was like, it was problematic, but it worked for him, right? And after that, he could produce. And then I had to tell him, yo, you got to revive the zombie editor, son, because you got run-ons and stuff, But, you just kind of figure out what works for you. But get out of that perfectionist mentality. I would say in any craft, perfectionism is not going to serve you, because it's too ideal. You want to produce a work first, no matter what it is, right? And so just take that to heart. But I do agree with everything Pedro has said. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to get birthed on the page. That's your goal. Your goal is to transmit the story as honestly as possible, and then work on the editing later, right? Does that make sense? The same is true for your essays that I know are due in a week or two. You see what I'm saying? That workshopping experience, don't worry about that draft being perfect. Bring what you can, and then revise it. Go through the proofreading techniques that I taught you. Please spell check, right? All that good stuff. So any other questions from the chat or the audience? Yes, Olivia.
All right, so to preface this, I need a little bit of context. I was reading a book by Nikolai Gogol, which is not a horror story, it's a satire book, and it was written in the 1800s in Russia. During the creation of this book, Gogol had a couple problems, and he ended up burning the original copy of his work, so the book was never finished, and he actually died due to starvation, because he completely stopped eating while writing it because he was so passionate about it. So he never was able to finish it. Now this is important. Okay, I'm getting there. So, you guys talked at length about the problems of being a writer, the struggles, the failures, the losses. And I was wondering, what is your philosophy on failure and on sorrow and the suffering of art? Do you embrace it or do you think it's unnecessary? Do you think there's a way around it or do you take it within yourself and work with it?
That's a beautiful question. Beautiful. Okay. Oh, I'll leave that to you two.
All right. Well, I think that Gogol is a genius, somebody that I can't relate to. So you know, you know what I mean? It's like he's like another plane of existence. So I'll say that first, but I think that the suffering that comes into it, I did say earlier that sometimes it's struggle and write for hours and come up with 250 words. Yeah, the struggle is there, and but it does feel good to get something completed. So I think that yeah, the struggle of an artist or whatever, I don't know, like I myself that way. Maybe in the end, you know, when it comes out and it's edited and I've gone through it 2 or 3 times, then I feel good about having produced something to get that done. And it does take work and it does take effort. So I think it's akin to just kind of just working through anything and working through any issue, any problem. Yeah, it's a problem I guess I brought on myself because I have the idea for a story and I don't have to do it. But it does feel good because what I said earlier, I want to tell this story. I just have a feeling, a calling that people need to know about it, especially when it comes to nonfiction. People need to know the story of this person. People need to know the story of this relationship because it hasn't been written. So I think that having done that, or even just my own personal story, my viewpoint on something, or a fictional story, and I want to find a voice in order to tell a story that shows a perspective that hasn't been told before. And I think it's worth it. And I think it's worth it for everybody in here, you know, to tell your own story, even if it's nonfiction or fiction, whatever form it takes. Or like as we said earlier about like music, whatever it is, to create something to like have a voice and contribute to, just like the order of knowledge, to contribute to something. And I think that I don't know if I answered the question necessarily, but to having produced something, I think is worth the struggle for me.
Yeah, I'm just gonna real quick before Pedro, because we have to raffle some books. I embrace every aspect of the process. I may not enjoy it, but I embrace it. But I'm gonna tell you this right now. You don't have to suffer like Gogol. You don't have to have been from a rough neighborhood to be able to write good literature. That's what the imagination is for. Like I grew up with an alcoholic father, very poor, but you know, you don't have to live through that kind of existence to produce material. I don't remember what writer said, like if you survive your childhood, you have enough in you to write volumes, right? So Pedro, go ahead. Super quick though, because we got 2 minutes left. Sorry.
Sure,
2 minutes
sure.
left.
There's a lot of pain in the writing world. For example, it's not just about writing, which is painful. It's hard to come up, especially with longer works. Like it's challenging and grueling to write a novel, which I'm working on right now. It's my second novel. But for example, is other pain. About 3 years ago, I lost everything in my hard drive. Every short story I'd ever written, every poem I'd ever written, every novel I'd ever written, wiped out. And that's the only place I had stored it. So I had that broke me. That's pain. So I had to retrieve bits and scraps from emails from other submissions that I'd sent, and I had to get that, which were incomplete pieces. I wrote a children's book manuscript 3 years ago that I sent to a big children's book publisher. The publisher herself wrote to me, she said she really liked the manuscript, and that I'd be hearing from her soon, and we'd be in touch. Never heard from her again. It's been 3 or 4 years now, so that hurt a lot. So she ghosted me basically, and I thought here I was with a big chance. So there's a lot of pain that comes with rejection, or not hearing back, or losing your stories, or the process of creation. But like Al said, I think creation is worth all of that pain. And like Jesus said, it's not necessary for you to suffer that much to create beautiful art. Art is made by poor people, by wealthy people, by broken people, by healthy people. You don't need to suffer, but it will happen. You know, not by choice, but creation. When you create something that you're really happy with, it makes it all worthwhile. So that's my take on that.
Excellent. And listen, I know this was a great class, and thank you for your thoughtful questions, chat, and here. So we're going to give away a couple of books, and also going to give away a couple of Kindle books. Kindle people in chat, think of a number from 1 through 10. The first 2 students that get it are going to get a copy of Endless Depths and also of Broken Olive Branches, which is a charity book for the people of Palestine. And just real quick to remind you again, There will be a candle vigil at 1 o'clock. I hope you can come. It's very important that we support our Palestinian family because they're, experiencing terrible things right now. At 3 o'clock, we're going to be at Barbara's bookstore in the basement of Macy's if you wish to come. And then at 4 o'clock, we're going to be at the AMC at Block 37 to watch the movie Bob Marley, One Love, which again is about the creation of a beautiful album with political repercussions, right? So, okay. So first, here we go.
See the winning number 520-561. 520-561.
Come on down. Okay. Do you want olive branches or they're both beautiful. One is okay. That one's olive branches. The one about I don't know what the theme is, but it's about the Middle East. I have to read it yet. Okay, very good. One more. Yeah.
Okay, last three numbers 556.
556. All right. Oh, Alexis, come on down. All right. And then two, I just want to thank you both. This was amazing. I learned a lot from this experience. I hope you didn't mind me jumping in, but it's been a beautiful, beautiful time. We're going to do a few more Kindle giveaways. And I did give away this amazing bag of goodies to our friend. They are receiving honorariums thanks to the subs. But there's a lunchbox in there. I was like, I want a lunchbox. All right. So, woo! All right, and maybe not that many people are asking. Leah, you may be the only winner. Come on, all you got to do is say a number and you're going to win. All right, I think, Leah, you win. So email me, or if we lose a thread, I am in room 629. You're welcome to come in. You can come bring me your work to share it. I don't mind giving feedback because I believe we should support each other. My email is alphabet soup. Does anybody else? Does anybody want to get a Kindle book from the audience? Anybody a number for what? And then he will also, anybody want a Kindle book? First person to raise their hand wins. No? Well, looks like Leah, you will be getting 2 books. Thank you. Let's give him a huge round of applause. I mistyped my email. Anyway, huge round. Thank you. Thank you. This was amazing. Take some snacks and keep working on your papers. Yes.
Just wanted to say to Pedro, I like your shirt.
Oh, did you hear that?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Big fan.
Same one.
Nice. Love it.
All right. Thank you. Thank
Love
you
it.
so much. Beautiful. It's actually Estrada de Jesus. I put an extra Y in there. Leah, come see me in 629, or let me give you the email again. I messed up. Estrada de Jesus. Not everybody has my email. Please email me and I'll get those Kindle books to you. Pedro, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I hope someday to bring you to Harold Washington. And think of this as your second home. Al, think of this as your second home. He's over there with his tia. Okay, have an amazing day, everybody. Thank you again for watching.
It was a pleasure. We'll
Bye.
talk to you later, Jesús.
Sounds good.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Al says goodbye. Take care.
Bye.